Hey guys, tonight we are slipping quietly into a rainy morning in 14th century Florence. The kind where bells toll dully through mist, the rooftops wear beads of silver, and the city smells like wet stone, moss, and yesterday's bread. Your shoes are damp before you've even left the stairs, and the wool cloak clinging to your shoulders, it's not exactly helping. A fine drizzle mutes the skyline and dribbles from the noses of the gargoyles, creating little streams in the alleys that lead nowhere fast. You squint toward the Ponte Vecchio and realize you're already late for something you didn't want to do in the first place. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing where you all tune in from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle out into the street, eyes adjusting to the hazy silver dawn. The rain is light but steady, and the cobblestones are slick with secrets. Each footstep squishes just enough to remind you of your poor life choices regarding footwear. Wool socks and Florentine puddles, a tragic love story. Around you, the city awakens under a gray veil. Shopkeepers mutter under their breath as they lower awnings. Laundry flaps uselessly from windowsills, drooping like wet flags of small domestic failures. A delivery boy is already arguing with a fishmonger about whether or not fish smell better in the rain. They don't, while a flock of pigeons patrols the piazza like feathered tax collectors. Here's a proper historical fact to chew on with your imaginary breakfast. In 14th century Florence, rainfall wasn't just weather, it was a minor event, a municipal one. Florentines of the time were deeply attuned to the sky's moods. Rain could delay court proceedings, stall market permits, or inspire spontaneous, unannounced holidays. Some chroniclers would even record particularly soggy weeks alongside outbreaks and famines, as though a long rain might be part of the divine punishment package. But rain was also interpreted emotionally. If the sun brought fortune and power, Florence being a city of merchants who liked their ledgers dry, rain was thought of as introspective, melancholy, poetic, the weather of saints, widows, and underpaid scribes. You pass an elderly man sweeping his stoop with great ceremony, despite the rain undoing every stroke. He's muttering about the good old dry Januaries, which historians still argue whether actually existed or if they were just collective delusions of the elderly who missed their hair. Down the street, a priest in a soaked robe stands under a dripping lintel, debating internally whether to bless the rain or curse it. He decides to squint at the sky and do neither. You're making your way toward the Mercato Vecchio now, hood pulled low, eyes scanning the wet tapestry of daily life. A pair of apprentices are jousting with laundry poles in the alley, both slipping spectacularly. One of them calls the other rain-born, which sounds like an insult, but also kind of noble. A little girl, barefoot and triumphant, dances in the puddles outside her mother's workshop. Her laughter rises above the clatter of shutters and the soft percussion of rain on tile roofs. A few onlookers pretend not to smile. Florentine stone, you'll notice, glows a different shade in the rain, richer, darker, like it remembers the river from which it came. Even the air has changed. Damp rosemary, smoke from last night's fires, and the sweet rot of yesterday's flowers laid at saints' shrines. The bells of Santa Maria Novella toll again. Their echo warps slightly in the mist, like someone humming through fabric. You pass a sign that reads, Attenzione, lastra scivolosa, a wet slab warning scrawled by someone who knows their audience. Florence may be cultured, but its stones are still traitors when wet. You're nearly at the loggia now, where the merchants usually stand beneath the arches, shouting prices and pretending not to notice the leaks directly above their heads. Today, They're whispering. There's something in the rain that quiets even commerce. And somewhere in the distance, you hear the first creak of a wooden pole unfurling canvas. A Florentine umbrella. Not a common sight yet, not by a long shot. But we'll get to that soon. For now, you wrap your arms tighter around yourself, not from cold, but from a feeling of being beautifully small beneath a dripping, ancient sky. A sky. You duck beneath the shallow arch of a butcher's awning, just as a rivulet of roof water splashes from above, narrowly missing your hood. A man selling barlick strings nods knowingly, as if the rain is something you've both agreed not to blame. You stand there, dripping gently, watching the rain stitch threads between awnings, puddles, hats, and heaven. A woman in an indigo cloak hurries past, holding a piece of bark over her head, wider than practical, but her expression is regal, as if daring the clouds to do worse. Across the street, a teenage boy leans against a wet column with the intensity of someone trying not to look like he cares that his sleeves are completely soaked. To understand how the people of medieval Florence thought about rain, you first have to think about God's moods. Not in the thunderbolt hurling sense, though sure, those existed, but in the quieter, more interpretive sense of divine ambiance. Rain was not simply precipitation, it was commentary, a celestial sigh, a baptism, a reprimand, or, if the mood was right, a flirtation. When it rained during weddings, it was said the angels were weeping for the loss of innocence, which, frankly, seems a bit dramatic. If it rained on a trial day, the city might whisper that justice was being watched more closely than usual. And when it rained during a feast, well, that could mean anything from divine displeasure to an omen of abundance. Historians still argue whether such rain readings were taken seriously by the upper classes or just quoted loudly by those standing under awnings without bread. Back then, the Florentine sky was its own kind of orator, just a very damp one. You pass a chapel door carved with saints, most of them now shiny with wet stone. Rain clings to their robes like real fabric. A child in a red cap runs a finger down the slick marble toe of St. Dominic, giggling. His mother shushes him, but not too harshly. There's something charming, after all, about a child greeting the saints like neighbors caught in the rain. As you walk, you notice how the rhythm of the city shifts under weather's weight. No horses galloping today, just the squish and clip of cautious hooves. The market criers swap their usual yells for solemn nods and murmured offers. And conversations, those ever-flowing rivers of Florentine debate and drama, become less about politics and more about puddles. At the corner of Via delle Terme and the Old Grain Archway, an elderly bookseller has placed a single stool in the dry wedge beside his stall. He doesn't sit, he stares at the rain like it's an old rival who once cheated him at dice. His beard is silver, his hands are ink-stained. He mutters, "Last time it rained like this, Micheluccio dropped a whole crate of sonnets into the Arno." You nod solemnly, though you have no idea who Micheluccio is. Fun fringe tidbit, some medieval Florentines swore they could identify specific types of rain, by smell, by timing, even by the patterns they made in gutter runoff. There was pioggia de duello, dueling rain, which always seemed to show up after a sword fight, and pioggia de pittori, painter's rain, said to fall in soft bursts during long stretches of creative failure. You reach the steps of a small bakery, the smell of warm fig bread curling around your senses like a hug. A young man steps out, tearing off the end of a still steaming loaf. The rain has soaked the shoulders of his tunic, but he grins at you like this moment, this damp morning, with its pigeons and puddles and bread, is the best thing that's happened all week. Maybe it is. He waves the bread toward the sky and mutters something about St. Zenobius needing a bath. You step into the bakery, if only for a moment, and let the dry air wrap around you. A group of women are laughing around a tray of biscotti, each with a steaming mug of barley brew. One points out that rain makes husbands come home earlier, and that's either a blessing or a punishment, depending on how much wine was left in the house. The baker, a stout man with forearms like loaves themselves, glances toward the window and sighs. At least the rats won't be in the alley tonight," he mutters. And here's the scholarly debate that still drizzles through academic halls today. Did the people of medieval Florence truly revere rain as a message from the divine, or was it just a practical excuse to slow life down? To be late for church, to linger at the bakery, to put off errands, and simply watch the sky weep while sipping something warm? No one knows for sure. But right now, as you sip a borrowed mug of barley brew, watching the steam curl upward toward the leaky wooden rafters, you feel it. The collective exhale of a city that's too proud to rush through its own rain. The baker, a stout man with forearms like loaves themselves, offers you a small square of something sweet. You accept it and nod your thanks. Outside, the rain carries on, unconcerned, unhurried. You step back into it like a returning friend. The hood of your cloak barely holds. And Florence, soaked and sighing, goes on pretending it doesn't mind. You trudge toward the Piazza della Signoria now, shoes properly squelching, and not for the last time do you wonder if your cloak has always smelled faintly of wet parchment, or if that's just your imagination growing mold. The rain has picked up, not a storm exactly, but that gentle, soaking persistence that makes roofs question their life choices and pigeons reevaluate their dreams. The square is quieter than usual. No jugglers, no political agitators with ink-stained fingers waving pamphlets. Just a few diehards under archways, leaning dramatically like rain-soaked philosophers. And in the center, a collection of puddles so deliberate they may as well be decorative. You pause at the largest one, an oblong mirror reflecting the Palazzo Vecchio's brooding stone. In it, a distorted tower wavers with each ripple, like the city is blinking slowly at its own reflection. A monk sloshes past and offers you the briefest nod, his sandals squishing like resignation itself. You crouch for a closer look, not at the reflection, but at the puddle's rim. It's deeper than it looks, lined with a tiny border of brick worn smooth from centuries of drip. A small leaf floats in the middle, possibly a piece of someone's lunch, possibly a sacrificial offering to the weather gods. Florentines were not casual puddle observers. Oh no, the depth, clarity, and behavior of puddles told their own story. Apprentices measured them with chalk sticks when they had nothing better to do, which was often. Children would race drops into them like ducklings into ponds. Some adults insisted that a puddle's persistence meant an unresolved civic dispute nearby, most often about drainage, sometimes about cheese. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Piazza della Signoria, though elevated slightly above the Arno floodplain, was notorious for pooling rainwater. Unlike modern urban planning, which tends to whisk away water as if embarrassed by it, medieval Florence let it sit. Puddles were tolerated like loud relatives, there, inconvenient, but too familiar to cast out. A cobbler once reportedly used puddles as free advertising, placing his finest waterproof shoes directly in one and pointing to them while yelling, "Still dry." It worked precisely once, before a competing cobbler accidentally stepped into the puddle wearing his own. You walk toward the corner of the square where a young scribe sits beside a drenched crate of inkpots, shading his parchment with a strip of leather tied to a stick, an early umbrella prototype, perhaps? It's not elegant, but he's dryish. He glances up and mutters, "It's the kind of rain that dulls quills." You nod solemnly. He offers you a dripping stool. You decline. It looks like it sighs when sat upon. A few paces away, two women wrapped in brown cloaks are whispering about the statue of Judith and Holofernes. One gestures to the pooling water beneath the statue's feet and says, "She's finally weeping for him." Her friend replies, "No, that's just pigeons." You pretend not to laugh. There's a low rumble of thunder somewhere distant, not dramatic enough to panic the church bells, but enough to make a man carrying apples pause mid-stride and look skyward, as though expecting divine opinion on his produce. Your eyes are drawn to a side alley where a boy is doing what can only be described as splash cartography. He's using the heel of his sandal to push water into channels, creating tiny rivers along the worn grooves of the stone. You recognize his strategy: divert, contain, create whirlpools for dramatic flair. It's part science, part theater, and fully endorsed by generations of equally bored children. Scholars have found records of civic leaders discussing puddles as genuine public issues, not in a fix the drainage way, but in a should we install a statue over that one so people stop walking through it way. Historians still argue whether this was early urban design or simply a polite way of giving up. You take a long breath of the cool, wet air. Florence smells different in rain. Less dust, more stone. A little iron, like old nails and sword hilts. Somewhere nearby, someone's roasting chestnuts. The scent drifts through the drizzle like a prayer. You make your way toward the Uffizi corridor, past stone pillars slick with moss. A cat watches you from beneath a marble bench, its ears twitching at the drops, but otherwise committed to stillness. You envy that cat a little. It has clearly accepted the rain as fact, not inconvenience. Above you, decorative gargoyles spill over with purpose. Some look joyful. You head toward the northern slope of the city now, where the artisan districts give way to quieter, more domestic alleys. Stone walls covered in ivy, little courtyards tucked like secrets behind crooked doorways. Here, the rain feels gentler somehow, more personal. It clinks off copper window boxes and rolls down handrails worn smooth by generations of Florentine palms. Your boots make that peculiar noise again, the wet shuffle of someone who gave up on dry socks 2 blocks ago. You are no longer dodging puddles, you're walking through them with purpose, a minor act of defiance or maybe resignation. And in this part of town, you notice something odd. Not a soul carries an umbrella. But wait, no one ever really does. The concept of the umbrella, you see, is still delicate in Florence. It exists, technically, but it teeters between invention and insult. Florentines of the Middle Ages viewed umbrellas, particularly handheld personal ones, with a suspicion bordering on comedic. The first cloth canopies were seen not as clever solutions, but as statements. Statements like, "I am too precious to be rained on," or worse, "I think I'm from Paris." The earliest umbrella sightings were less practical than performative. Imagine a merchant's wife descending from a covered cart, holding above her a canvas parasol mounted on a stick. People stared. Children laughed. A dog barked at it, possibly out of professional obligation. And yet, it worked. She stayed dry. Others did not. You walk past a shoemaker's shop where 2 apprentices are arguing under a crooked roof edge. One is holding what can only be described as a failed umbrella. A thin wooden rod with 4 bent ribs and a single scrap of oilcloth clinging like a tattered flag. The other snorts, "You look like a drowning bat." The first shrugs, "Still better than your hat." Historical fact time. In 14th century Florence, umbrellas were considered either extravagances or theatrical props. Most people relied on hoods, cloaks, and architectural mercy. Loggias and arches did more for dryness than any object one could carry. The city itself was the umbrella, if you had the wit to plan your path. Some guilds dabbled in umbrella-like devices. The cloth merchants, of course, couldn't help but experiment with waterproof materials. But the tanners and leather workers, they scoffed at umbrellas. Why block the rain when your cloak absorbs your identity, one might say while dripping dramatically onto the floor. In fact, Florentine courtyards often had central drains, built less to whisk away floods and more to stage philosophical debates about whether rain fell in straight lines or spirals. Historians still argue whether some of these features were architectural choices or happy accidents caused by uneven masonry and wishful thinking. You pass under a heavy stone arch where someone has scrawled in Old Tuscan script, "Meglio bagnato che vanitoso," better soaked than vain. A popular saying, often mumbled when umbrellas were mentioned. Also popular, sarcastically calling an umbrella a rooftop with delusions of grandeur. Still, there were innovators. In a back courtyard, you catch sight of a cloth awning mounted to a long stick, balanced between two crates and tilted just so. Beneath it, a gray-bearded tailor is calmly stitching a hem, bone needle flashing despite the drizzle. It's not quite an umbrella, not quite a tent, but it's dry, and that seems to matter more than the category. You watch for a moment. A pigeon lands atop the makeshift cover. The tailor looks up and mutters something in Latin, possibly a blessing, possibly an insult. The pigeon responds with silence, mutual respect. Further on, you pass a tiny stone church with a round oculus in the roof. Rain falls directly through it into a basin carved with fish and lilies. A nun is mopping the edges, humming what might be a hymn or a recipe. She nods as you pass, like she too agrees that rain is a lesson and not a complaint. And here's your quirky tidbit. There are records of Florentine children using repurposed umbrellas not to stay dry, but as theatrical costumes. One play reportedly featured the spirit of rain, descending from above while spinning a parasol painted with clouds and the face of St. Anthony. He was booed for blocking the bishop's view. A sudden gust of wind whips through the alley, sending a sheet of rain diagonally into your face with the force of a small philosophy lecture. You sputter. A baker's boy across the street yells, "Umbrella coulda helped," and vanished into a doorway. You pass a wall with a faded fresco, angels in robes, halos. You peel yourself from the stone wall with some reluctance. It's become your favorite dry spot in the last 5 minutes, and step back into the drizzle. The rain is steadier now, one of those oddly consistent Florentine downpours that doesn't pour so much as politely insist. Like a guest who never stops talking but never quite gives you a reason to ask them to leave. You're on your way to the artisan district now, where paint runs from workshops and perfumed oils mingle with rainwater in the gutters. The street winds past a series of arches so low that even the rain has to duck. And here, in this saturated slice of the city, you begin to notice something. Wet cloaks are more than just wet cloaks. They're statements. You pass a silk merchant whose outer robe is soaked to the knees. He wears it like a badge, nose slightly raised, as if to say, "Yes, I have walked through this weather. Yes, I am still fabulous." His sleeves drip rhythmically. His sandals squish like applause. It's clear he could have stayed indoors, but chose this walk for visibility, both in fashion and in ego. Florentines had a thing for wet fashion. There's your mainstream historical fact of the day. Unlike some cities that shrank from the rain, Florence leaned in. A rain-darkened cloak, especially if made of fine wool or dyed velvet, gained depth and richness when soaked. It gave the wearer an air of gravitas, like a soggy philosopher who just emerged from a debate so intense it made the heavens cry. You round a corner and see two women sharing a single hood, their cloaks soaked, their arms linked tightly. They're laughing, not because anything particularly funny was said, but because the weather has stripped away all pretense. Wet wool humbles everyone. A tanner nearby waves a dripping hide at the sky. "The rain's blessing this one," he grins, "or cursing. Either way, it's tanned." And there's the quirky tidbit for you. Rain was sometimes interpreted as divine fabric approval. If a bolt of cloth dried too quickly under the eaves, it was said to have been rejected by the sky. On the other hand, if it held the rain and deepened in tone, a blessing. Entire guild decisions on dye formulas were influenced by weather. There were arguments about whether gray was noble or just mold adjacent. You pause in front of a mirror seller's stall. Glass panes lined in tight rows, each one fogged with mist. Each one reflecting rain-slick faces, sagging hats, cloaks clinging to forms like defeated sails. One mirror has etched in its corner, "La pioggia rende veri." Rain reveals truth. You don't know if that's a proverb or a warning. Possibly both. Florentine men were known to strut after a storm, cloaks plastered dramatically to their bodies, boots squelching with pride. Tailors began designing outer garments with extra drape just to accommodate the post-rain reveal. Historians still argue whether this was fashion-led or vanity-fueled, but it's safe to assume it was a generous helping of both. You pass a small square where three elderly gentlemen are perched under an overhang, watching the world drip by. One of them points at a young man sprinting past, cloak billowing behind him like a soaked flag. "That's the run of someone who wore linen on a gamble," he mutters. The others nod sagely. At the fountain nearby, a baker wrings out the bottom of his apron while guarding a basket of rolls. He shouts to no one in particular. "Hot bread's hotter in the rain." You believe him. You almost forgive him for using soggy croissants as a marketing ploy. Further up the alley, a lute player is tucked under a tight archway, plucking a slow melody. His instrument is wrapped in cloth, the kind only musicians or very paranoid librarians use. He plays with calm resignation, the kind that says, "If I must get wet, I shall do it musically." The entire city seems to be playing along with the weather, not resisting but participating. The rain is not an interruption. It is part of the performance. And then, just before you duck into another passage, you spot a noblewoman in deep forest green, her velvet gown soaked but still stunning, standing alone beneath a leaking cornice. Her hat droops tragically, a strand of hair sticks to her cheek. She looks glorious, like a statue brought to life by water. She meets your eye for half a second, then looks away as if nothing happened. That's the Florentine fashion mindset during rain. Suffer, but make it look like poetry. You pass a tailor's sign swaying in the wind. Under it, a clique arranges a display of cloaks, all labeled by how they look when wet. "This one broods," he says, pointing to a charcoal wool. "That one weeps," he says, of a burgundy with unfortunate streaks. And this one, a stunning ochre, rejoices. The rain agrees. It begins to fall harder. You pull your own cloak closer, knowing full well it. You step away from the cloaked mannequins and their poetic suffering and continue down the narrow street, where the rain now sounds like soft applause against the tiled rooftops above. The gutter runoff splashes with a little more confidence, creating rivulets that curl like handwriting through the alleys. And as you round a bend, a very specific scent greets you: wet wool. Not the pleasant kind either. The deeply musty, oddly sweet, pungent presence of Florentine cloaks left too long in their own drama. Welcome to the olfactory underbelly of Florence in the rain. You walk past a doorway where three cloaks hang on a shared peg just inside the threshold. Steam rises faintly from them. The scent wafts out with a force that makes you blink. A passing apprentice pinches his nose and mumbles something about "smells like a bishop's sock drawer." The woman behind the door laughs, loud and unrepentant. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In 14th century Florence, wool was the most common cloak fabric. Strong, warm, and abundant thanks to the city's lucrative textile trade. But wool, when wet, retains its smell. Not just water, but everything else it's ever encountered. Smoke, garlic, sweat, dust, perfume, a brief flirtation with rosemary, and sometimes a tragic encounter with cheese. In rainy weather, Florentine homes would fill with the scent of drying cloaks. Whole rooms were dedicated to the process, often referred to jokingly as the cloak chapel. Some families swore by hanging cloaks upside down. Others rolled them into bundles and placed them under warm tiles. Historians still argue whether this helped or simply moved the stink around more evenly. You pass a tanner's stall where a man in a stained apron is sniffing at a damp hide, with the concern of a sommelier. He nods once, satisfied. "Still good," he says, as if rain has the power to age leather like wine. Maybe it does. A child runs past you in a miniature cloak, comically large, dragging behind him like a royal train. Every 5 steps he stops to sniff it dramatically, "Mine smells like lemons," he announces to no one. "You're sniffing the dog," replies his sister from a doorway. The boy shrugs. Still counts. You pause beside a baker's oven vent where the competing aromas of cinnamon and wet wool fight valiantly for your attention. Cinnamon wins, barely. The baker emerges, holding a tray of steaming bread under a cloth canopy that looks suspiciously like a repurposed tablecloth tied to a broom handle. It works, mostly. You're starting to notice the creativity rain inspires in Florentines. If umbrellas are suspect and cloaks are theatrical, then scent is a battlefield and everyone's enlisted. Inside a small perfumery, you catch a glimpse of flasks lined up like soldiers, labeled with names like Pioggia di Prato, Rain of the Meadow, Muschio Bagnato, Wet Moss, and, rather ominously, Nobile Umido, Noble Damp. A customer leans in to sniff one and recoils gently, blinking like a surprised owl. The perfumer just smiles and says, "Realism." Here's your fringe tidbit. There was once a guild-funded experiment to create waterproof scent beads for cloaks. Supposedly sewn into hems and activated by rain, they would release pleasing aromas as the wool absorbed moisture. The project failed after several exploded during a thunderstorm and stained an abbot's entire wardrobe with violet perfume. He smelled like a spring garden for weeks and was furious about it. You walk past a stonemason's workshop where cloaks hang from pegs near a furnace. One of the masons is toasting his sleeves in the firelight, humming tunelessly. He sees you looking and offers a shrug. "If it smells bad now, just wait until it's dry," he says. That's when the real regrets set in. You've now entered what locals jokingly call La Nebbia di Lana, the wool mist, a pocket of the city known for damp cloth, narrow alleys, and zero airflow. It's like walking through a fog made entirely of grandma's old coats. And still, people smile through it. One man waves his hand in front of his face and says, "Ah, the scent of civic pride." Another mutters, "This is why saints live on mountains." A few more steps and you're back out in the open, where the wind moves a little more freely and the cloaks smell a little less aggressive. You take a deep breath and, wait, is that lavender? It is. You spot the source, a young woman carefully pinning lavender sprigs to the inside of her cloak collar. She notices you noticing. "My mother's idea," she says, "makes me smell like summer, or a laundry basket." You nod approvingly. "Better than moldy church bench," she replies with a grin. Scholars still argue whether scented cloaks were. You drift down toward the Arno, where the rain hits differently. It's softer here, but more insistent, as though the river has whispered a deal with the clouds. The cobblestones are darker, slick with sheen, and the air has that unmistakable metallic tang of wet riverbanks and stone warmed just enough to remember yesterday's sun. The Ponte Vecchio looms ahead, shrouded in a soft haze. Jeweler stalls along the bridge are closed, their shutters dripping, their metal locks catching and holding beads of rain like tiny trophies. You walk slowly, the kind of walk that only happens in rain, deliberate, squelching, your pace no longer your own, but dictated by the slipperiness of marble and pride. Near the base of the bridge, a wooden cart is parked askew beneath a crumbling archway. A canopy has been rigged above it, 4 poles lashed together with cord and covered by what appears to be a stitched-together sail. It flaps gently in the wind like a flag unsure of its allegiance. Beneath it, an older man in a battered cloak sells dried herbs. He isn't really trying. His eyes are more focused on the canopy above, which drips steadily onto his display. He frowns upward, as if daring the sky to try harder. You watch him adjust the corner with a practiced tug, then slap the side of the cart as if to say, "Still standing." And here it is, the glorious mess that is Florence's early attempts at rain shielding. Not quite umbrellas, not quite tents, but something braver than a hood and more committed than a roof. These were the proto-canopies, part fashion, part accident, part stubborn gesture against gravity itself. Here's your historical fact. In the late 14th century, some Florentine market stalls began to experiment with collapsible rain covers. These weren't meant for individuals, but for merchandise. Preserving silk bolts and expensive fruit from becoming damp disasters was a priority, and thus the canopy on poles idea took its first creaky, canvas-clad steps into the world. Naturally, the merchants argued over it. Some claimed the awnings violated street width regulations. Others said they ruined the visual harmony of the piazza. Historians still argue whether the true objection was aesthetic or territorial. You duck under one such awning just as a wagon rumbles past, its wheels flinging arcs of river-colored water across the stones. The awning lets out a groan. You and the merchant beneath both flinch. The canvas holds. Sort of. This one is patched in 7 places, 5 with mismatched cloth, 1 with what looks like a strip of leather glove, and 1 using what you swear is a page from a psalm book. You glance up and catch the merchant's shrug. It was already ruined, he says, as though explaining the page. Better it catch rain than dust. A few stalls down, another merchant is losing his battle. The canvas above his fruit stand has collected a shallow pool of rainwater, bowing alarmingly in the center. He pokes at it with a broom handle, gently at first, then with growing panic. The sagging pool wobbles, threatens, and finally spills in one glorious melon-scented cascade. A passing nun gasps, a child cheers. The merchant sighs. At least the apples got baptized, he mutters. You wander on, the chaos of canopies trailing behind you like a damp opera. Every stall has its own version, some shaped like triangles, some like sails, a few ambitious enough to attempt domes. Most of them leak, all of them flap. And here's a quirky tidbit. One tailor guild attempted to standardize these canopies. They drew up a design with precise measurements, recommended materials, and instructions for sloping angles to discourage puddling. It failed immediately when a rival guild accused them of umbrella imperialism. The blueprints were later repurposed as wrapping for fish. Up ahead, you see a man balancing an entire basket of scrolls under a crude umbrella-like device. It's clearly handmade, 4 long reeds supporting a hexagonal frame of oiled paper. It creaks with each step, sways perilously, but holds. Just barely. He passes by a group of seated monks, one of whom watches the contraption with the expression of someone watching a chicken ride a unicycle. Impressed, but suspicious. One monk leans to his neighbor and mutters, "It offends the sky." The other replies, "It offends me." You keep walking, shoes growing heavier, the rain unrelenting but somehow softer now. You pass a dog sleeping under a fruit stand, its nose just poking from beneath a tarp, sniffing in time with the patter above. Nearby, a blacksmith's apprentice uses an upside-down shield as a makeshift umbrella. His master looks on, unimpressed, and mutters, "That's not what it was forged for." The apprentice smiles. Today, it is. And there's the charm of it. Florence doesn't solve the rain, it flirts with it.
You're nearing the Piazza Santa Croce now, where the rain has softened into a rhythmic patter, like 1,000 fingertips tapping gently on rooftops and cloaks. The wide square stretches out ahead, shimmering with reflections, arches, windows, boots, and brief splashes of color from oilcloths thrown over baskets. A few daring Florentines have begun drifting toward the church steps, not for prayer exactly, but because the marble ledges under the eaves offer the most consistent shelter this side of heaven. You settle on the edge of a fountain, whose basin is beginning to resemble a soup of leaves, flower petals, and the occasional unlucky insect. A child leans over the side and drops in a pebble with ceremonial gravitas, announcing, "For the saint of sunshine." His mother rolls her eyes. He's ignoring you, clearly. There's something different about the mood here, quieter. The rain, now steadier than before, hasn't cleared the piazza. It's gathered its most devoted admirers. These are the ones who've grown used to preaching to puddles, selling to shadows, and performing to an audience of dripping statues. Among them stands a lone priest, tall, hooded, with robes clinging slightly to his form. He stands on the church steps, hands clasped, gazing up into the sky as if expecting a divine answer in the form of slightly warmer drizzle. His sermon was likely scheduled for indoors, but the square has become his cathedral. And so he begins. You sit quietly as his voice rolls through the air, not booming, but intentional. He's not shouting over the rain, he's letting it join him. He speaks of gratitude, of trials, of patience, and then, with a sly smile, of umbrellas. God does not mind that you stay dry, he says, but he surely minds when you forget how to endure getting wet. There's a chuckle from under a canvas stall. The priest continues, "The Lord sent sun and storm alike. If he wished you spotless, he'd have made you marble." Florentines love a sermon with sass. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Rain often disrupted religious services in Florence, not due to flooding, but due to noise. Tiled roofs, stone courtyards, and high ceilings all conspired to turn light rain into thunderous applause. Outdoor sermons, especially during festivals, were a constant gamble. A good priest knew how to adjust mid-verse. A great one turned the rain into a metaphor. And this priest is clearly in the latter camp. He pauses briefly as a burst of wind sends a spray over the front row of listeners, mostly elderly women with rosaries and indomitable hats. None of them move. One smiles. Another spits lightly into the wind and mutters something that might translate to, "Try harder, sky." You lean back against the fountain's damp stone and glance up at the church's carved facade. It glistens now, every groove outlined in silver. Water runs in tiny streams down the saints' robes, tracing their faces like tears. It's beautiful in the kind of way that only wet things can be, alive, vulnerable, seen. To your right, a musician tunes a lute under a cloth-draped doorway. He strums a few notes that seem to harmonize with the priest's words. The crowd grows still. The rain, as if out of politeness, steadies into a gentle rhythm. And here's your quirky tidbit. In certain quarters of Florence, people believed that if a sermon lasted exactly the length of a rainstorm, it was a sign of divine alignment. There's even a term for it in some convent records, omelia bagnata, the soaked sermon, a rare honor, often exaggerated. Historians still argue whether priests timed their sermons to the clouds or simply pretended they had afterward. A woman beside you whispers, "He's aiming for it." You glance at the priest. He's definitely pacing himself, watching the clouds like a gambler watching dice. He wraps up with a prayer, simple, kind, something about grace in discomfort and courage in soggy sandals. A few in the crowd whisper, "Amen." One man sneezes violently and mutters his own version of it. As the priest steps back under the church archway, the rain begins to ease. Barely. The crowd begins to shift, not to leave, but to reposition. People begin to talk again, quietly. One man tries to sell honey cakes from beneath a leaking umbrella. A dog shakes itself next to a magistrate. Life resumes. You stand slowly, cloak now clinging like a second skin. The fountain gurgles behind you, leaf soups.
You wander from Santa Croce with no particular destination, just the familiar rhythm of your steps syncing with the city's dripping tempo. The alleys narrow again, buildings leaning slightly inward as if conspiring, keeping the rain caught in their stone-cupped hands. You find yourself ducking under a series of awnings, ducking not to stay dry, what a lost cause that is now, but simply to prolong your conversation with the weather. This is when you hear it, a chorus of tapping, brushing, shuffling. You turn the corner and nearly collide with a street sweeper, broom in hand, coat trailing behind him like a damp comet. His face is obscured by the wide brim of a hat, and his boots are dark with muddy water. Behind him, another, and another, A whole troop of them, sweeping in sweeping rhythm, pushing leaves, twigs, stray bits of wax, orange peels, crumpled notes, and occasionally the memory of a dropped confession. Florentine street sweepers, unsung, underpaid, and hilariously competitive. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In the late medieval period, Florence employed organized street sweepers through various guilds and civic contracts. They were not simply janitors, they were civic performers, expected to maintain order, rhythm, and public cleanliness, particularly in the wealthier districts and during religious feasts. Rain, of course, ruined everything. You pause to watch the orchestrated mayhem. Two sweepers argue over where one pile of soggy debris stems and another begins. A third attempts to sweep water itself, earning only sarcasm and a splash to the boots. They lean heavily on their tools when they think no one's watching, backs aching, faces resigned. But the moment a city official walks by, instantly upright, polished posture, sweep with pride. The water is winning today. Rain has filled the gutters faster than they can clear it. But still, they sweep. You admire the commitment. There's a quirky little tale making the rounds among the sweepers, that one of them once pushed a puddle all the way to the river. Not its contents, the puddle itself. As if it were a living thing that didn't belong in the market district. He was said to be a quiet man who muttered to the puddle as he swept, whispering coaxing words, "Just a bit further, friend, we're almost there." No one knows if he ever made it, but the alley where it supposedly happened is now affectionately called Via delle Acque Testarde, Stubborn Water Street. You pass a group of sweepers gathered near a drain. They stare at it in defeat. The rainwater bubbles upward, as if laughing. One sighs, plants his broom like a flag and declares, "Let's claim it as a fountain." Applause breaks out from under the arches. Historians still argue whether Florentine drainage systems were intentional marvels or just well-placed mistakes. The Medici-funded renovations of certain streets did attempt to introduce better water runoff patterns, but citizens remained skeptical. Many believed puddles were fate. You could no more fix them than you could fix your cousin's obsession with turnip wine. You lean against a windowsill as a cart rolls by, its wheels splashing the street in twin arcs. The sweepers step aside with all the grace of soggy saints. One mutters something that sounds like a prayer or a curse, or maybe both. A noblewoman, tiptoeing delicately down the sidewalk, attempts to navigate between two puddles and a pile of what looks suspiciously like mashed figs. A sweeper offers his hand, not to escort her, but to gently redirect her trajectory like a gondolier steering a very confused boat. She nods with a mix of gratitude and annoyance. Her silk shoes are not long for this world. You step away from the wall just as the wind kicks up. A stray broom, leaning against a barrel, clatters dramatically. One sweeper points and declares, "It's decided. The storm has taken up arms." Another replies, "Then we must sweep harder." It's hard to tell if they're joking, but they salute each other with their brooms all the same. Further along, you catch sight of a boy sweeping with a stick barely taller than he is. His strokes are wild, unpracticed, completely ineffective, but he's grinning like a king. Behind him, an older sweeper watches fondly, then calls out, "You're hired. Pay starts in rainwater and ends in respect." The boy salutes, nearly falling over. The man nods. Good form. And there's the charm of it. Florentine sweepers, drenched to the bone, carrying out a task that rain mocks with every drop. But they don't stop. They don't even slow. They argue, yes. They complain, often. But they keep sweeping, because that's what Florence demands. Effort in the face of futility. Beauty in the mess. A final open scholarly debate for today. Were the sweepers' songs, low, rhythmic chants sung while clearing debris, actual?
You slosh onward, the puddle behind you a little less mysterious now, but still making suspicious noises with every step. You're deeper into the artisan quarters now, where balconies lean out like curious faces and ivy grows thick as gossip. The rain here makes everything look older, not ruined, just steeped,
like Florence has been brewing for hours in its own tea. A flicker of motion catches your eye. A curtain pulls back from a second-story window, revealing a child's wide eyes. She watches the street as if it's a stage performance. Actors in cloaks, extras with carts, the occasional dramatic splash. She holds a wooden spoon like a scepter, a queen surveying her kingdom of soggy chaos. You give her a small wave. She disappears, and a moment later you hear a soft drumbeat. Not rain this time, but spoon on windowsill. Rhythm, accompaniment. Florence loves to provide its own soundtrack. The rain continues, steady as ever. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Many Florentine homes in the 14th and 15th centuries were designed with water collection in mind. Cisterns, runoff gutters, sloped roofs, all part of a city that didn't just suffer rain, but used it. Rainwater was collected for washing, cooling wine, sometimes even dyeing cloth if the season was right. But drinking? Never. Rain was too suspect, too unpredictable. For that, you needed a well and luck. You pass a laundry line stretched beneath a tiled arch. Every piece of fabric on it is soaked, of course, hanging limp and theatrical like wet flags of forgotten nations. A woman leans out, unbothered. "It'll dry," she says, then laughs, "eventually." At a corner, you stop beneath a makeshift canopy, where two barbers are sitting idly outside their shuttered shop. One's sharpening scissors, the other's playing cards with a damp deck. The game is slow, thoughtful. The stakes appear to be nothing more than dignity. They look up as you approach. "Haircuts in the rain?" one asks, raising an eyebrow. "Adds character." You politely decline. "You'll regret it," he adds cheerfully. Florentines believed weather shaped people, not in a metaphorical way, but literally. Posture, gait, the crinkles in your cloak's hem. Rain made you hunched, made your boots squeak, made your hat droop just enough to ruin your swagger. But it also slowed you down, let your thoughts catch up. And here's your quirky tidbit. There was a popular superstition in Florence that walking in the rain without saying a prayer invited forgetfulness. Not full amnesia, just enough to misplace your keys, forget a name, burn the bread. Some even swore the rain whispered secrets and then took them back. That's why some old women murmured blessings under their breath with every step. In nomine pluviae. Now, where was I going? You step around a particularly large puddle and find yourself beside a painter's workshop. Door open, canvas covered in cloth, and a trail of colored water trickling from within. A young apprentice leans on the threshold, sighing at the sky. "Blue again," he mutters. "It's always blue when I need red." You ask what he means. He gestures at a bucket. Rain's changed the pigment, makes the vermilion sulk. He shrugs. Sometimes that's better. Then adds, as if quoting a sacred text, "Art should suffer." You keep walking, passing a stone well with an iron grate over the top. Someone's left an offering on the edge. A fig, half wrapped in a napkin, now soggy and slumping like a defeated soldier. Offerings like this weren't uncommon. The well spirits were temperamental, especially in the rain. Toss in something sweet, and maybe your cellar won't flood. At the next alley, a trio of tailors are arguing under an awning. One holds a drenched roll of green fabric, shaking it as if scolding a dog. "It bled," he cries. "Of course it bled," the older tailor snaps. "You stored it near the olive oil." The third sighs deeply. "It's a metaphor now. Sell it as tragic spring." Florence didn't waste accidents, especially the rain-born ones. If dye ran, it became a new shade. If parchment curled, it became weather-aged. Historians still argue whether this was resourcefulness or a particularly elegant form of denial. You step into a small piazza now, ringed by shuttered shops and echoing with the drip of water from a broken drain pipe. In the center is a small stone platform, used for announcements, public readings, and once, allegedly, a chicken wedding. The details are vague. Today, it hosts a sleeping dog and a dozen pigeons arguing about bread. You lean on a wall and let your cloak drip. A boy scampers by, holding something strange. A wooden contraption with a waxed paper fan mounted on top. You squint. Could it be? Yes, an early umbrella attempt. The boy laughs maniacally as it catches a breeze and folds in on itself like a frightened flower. He doesn't mind. He runs straight through a puddle and leaves a trail. You find yourself following a curve in the road that leads down into a more ancient part of the city, where the buildings are older, darker, their stonework weathered smooth by time and, of course, years of rain. Here, the streets narrow into finger-width alleys, where water collects in secret pools and echoes bounce like ghosts between the walls. You duck beneath a stone arch where vines hang heavy, dripping like they're sighing. Ahead, a metal grate in the street gurgles contentedly, drinking in the runoff as though Florence itself is having its morning coffee. And then you notice it. A row of people huddled under a long awning made from what appears to be stitched-together cloaks. They're not waiting out the rain. They're selling books. Yes, books. Rain-soaked, ink-smudged, parchment-curled copies of poetry, psalters, love letters, and legal complaints. Florence's answer to a waterlogged library clearance. This is your mainstream historical fact. Despite the obvious risks, book vendors in medieval Florence often sold their wares outdoors. Why? Because the best foot traffic happened during market days, and rain didn't stop markets, it just made them more theatrical. Vendors learned to waterproof their stalls using oiled cloth, beeswax-sealed crates, and sheer optimism. One elderly bookseller waves you over. He wears a wide hat that seems to function more as a philosophical statement than rain protection. The pages are damp, he says, but the words haven't drowned. He hands you a thin volume. The cover reads, "Sonnets to a Chicken." You raise an eyebrow. He nods solemnly. It's better than it sounds, or worse. It depends how you feel about chickens. You flip through the pages carefully. The ink has run in places, blurring vowels into rivers. A line about feathers and yearning has merged with a verse about rosemary and sin. Somehow, it's more poetic this way. Here's your quirky tidbit. Many Florentines believed that water-damaged books became more truthful, that the rain exposed what ink alone could not. Some even soaked important documents before signing them, as a kind of purification rite. If it survives the rain, they'd say, it deserves to be read. A young woman at the next stall uses a feather fan to dry her scrolls, fanning with such seriousness you'd think the fate of literature depended on it. Her stall is labeled "Letters Left Behind." It's filled with correspondence never picked up, never delivered, or simply never finished. One scroll ends mid-sentence. And if he returns before the feast, tell him. You step away, heart oddly heavy. Further down the alley, a small gathering forms under another canopy. A man with an inky nose and a smock that's more blot than fabric is declaiming poetry. Rain drips rhythmically from the awning as he reads a stanza about lost socks and divine mercy. A listener calls out, "Read the one about wet shoes again." He obliges. The crowd claps. A boy beside you whispers, "He makes the rain feel noble." You nod. That's Florence for you, romanticizing inconvenience until it becomes legend. Scholars still argue whether outdoor book markets were encouraged by guilds or merely tolerated by annoyed neighbors. There are records of disputes involving excess parchment runoff and accidental ink baths. At least one lawsuit involved a man slipping on a wet copy of Dante and suing for spiritual confusion. As the poetry winds down, you head back into the rain, past a mural of saints whose eyes had long since washed away. In the corner, someone has chalked in replacements, 2 mismatched buttons. They stare at you with surprising warmth. You duck into a tiny bakery with steam-fogged windows. Inside, the scent of honey and wood smoke wrestles with damp leather and satisfaction. A girl behind the counter offers you a biscuit and says, "If you read soggy poetry, you need something dry." You accept. It crumbles perfectly. Outside, the book vendors are packing up, wrapping parchment in layers of oilcloth, tying them with twine. Their faces are unreadable. Some smile, some grumble, all of them damp. And here's the truth Florence whispers through her sodden books. Not everything must survive pristine. Some things are better for having weathered the rain. You step out again, biscuit crumbs trailing behind you, and let the rain smudge the poetry in your memory just enough to make it your own.
You turn from the bakery, the warmth of honey still lingering on your tongue, and head into the heart of the textile district. A tangle of flagstones, jutting balconies, and 1,000 competing aromas. Here, the rain doesn't slow people down. It gives them new things to shout about. A man in a moss-colored tunic barrels past, carrying bolts of damp silk under one arm. Out of the way, the dye's bleeding like a stabbed plum. Behind him, another man chases him barefoot, waving a soaked invoice. You paid for yellow, not regret. Florence in the Rain is a comedy, and the textile district is its slapstick act. You edge past a loom shop where 2 apprentices are attempting to dry cloth by spinning it overhead. It flaps and snaps like a banner at war with the elements. An elderly weaver watches from the doorway, arms crossed, amused. They'll invent flight before they dry that linen, she mutters. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Florence's textile industry in the 14th and 15th centuries was not just prosperous, it was the backbone of its economy. Rain was both enemy and muse. Cloth was dyed, dried, combed, and spun under carefully managed conditions, until it rained, and everything had to adapt. Some merchants saw the rain as a disaster, others as a marketing opportunity. A sign above one shop proudly declares, "Dyed in stormlight, uniquely weathered threads." Below it, rows of cloaks hang in shades no one can name, partly because the original color has long since washed away. Florentines were, if nothing else, masters of reinvention. You duck under a striped awning where a young woman is arranging scarves on a rack. She catches your eye. "They shimmer better when damp," she says, and flips one dramatically. It lands in a puddle. She lets it stay. Now it has character. Here's your quirky tidbit. There were once competitions among cloth merchants to see who could create the most rain-resistant yet romantic fabric. The winner one year submitted a cloak that turned translucent when wet, revealing an embroidered love poem hidden in the lining. It was considered wildly inappropriate. Orders tripled. You press on through a courtyard lined with low stone walls and wide vats. These were once dye baths, though today they hold only rainwater and a few floating twigs. An old man sits beside them, pipe in hand, watching the clouds. He nods at you. "You know," he says, "we used to test dye fastness by leaving cloth out in the rain overnight. If it held, it was a marriage. If not," he shrugs, "annulment." Scholars still argue whether this was real practice or just an excuse for bad inventory decisions. But you want it to be true. It feels true. A bolt of red cloth suddenly flutters from a second-floor window, catching the air like a rebellious banner. You follow its descent as it lands with a slap across the back of a passing clerk, who turns slowly, drenched in rouge and confusion. A tailor leans from above and calls, "It needed dramatic exit." A small crowd applauds. Someone yells, "Encore!" Florence, it seems, has always understood that even mistakes should have flair. As you weave through more stalls, you notice one weaver selling storm stripes, cloth woven with deliberate imperfections meant to mimic the streaks left by rain. Predictive fashion, she explains. It rains, you match. It doesn't, you look like you've survived something. You pass a narrow shop where looms clatter in a rhythmic duet with the falling rain. Inside, a woman works with hands so quick they blur. Her window is fogged, but her expression is clear, focused, proud. A sign above her loom reads, "Rain is the handmaid of texture." A dog naps beside her stool, nose tucked under its tail, completely at peace with the damp. You're tempted to join it. And here's the open scholarly debate. Were the waterlogged textures and accidental hues of Florentine textiles embraced out of necessity or aesthetic rebellion? Some say merchants leaned into the chaos. Others argue the public simply learned to call damage fashion.
As you reach the end of the street, the rain shifts again, lighter now, playful. It dances along clotheslines and skips across cobblestones. You hear laughter ahead and round the corner to find children jumping from puddle to puddle, their cloaks flaring like capes. One of them declares, "I am the Duke of Dampness," and is promptly tackled. Their mother watches from a bench, half drenched but smiling. "They'll sleep well," she says. You nod. Rain is Florence's lullaby. You pass beneath another awning, this one sagging slightly with the weight of water, and pause to let it drip down your sleeve. It's oddly comforting, like being gently poked by history. Florence weaves even its weather into its identity. Not in grand gestures, but in threadbare cloaks, You cross into a quieter part of the city now, where the buildings lean older, the alleys twist tighter, and the rain feels like it's been here for centuries. Less like weather, more like inheritance. This is where the scribes live, or once did, their narrow homes stacked with secrets, parchment, and ink stains that no storm can wash away. As you pass beneath a creaking wooden beam strung with moss, you hear the familiar scratching sound of quill on parchment. A tiny window glows with candlelight, just bright enough to reveal a hunched figure bent over a desk. You pause, watching. The man inside dips his quill, writes, pauses, and mutters, "That's not how a metaphor drowns." Then he sighs and starts again. This is the quarter of letters and records, and here's your mainstream historical fact. Florence kept meticulous civic records even in the 14th century. Births, deaths, debts, marriages, dowries, court decisions, all logged and stored in parchment bound with iron clasps. The rain was their natural predator. Entire archives were built with elaborate drainage, double walls, sloped floors, and bribes to the weather gods. You pass a woman hurriedly stuffing scrolls into a canvas sack. "It's always the love letters that get soaked," she mutters, pulling a scarf over her head. "War declarations, dry as bone, but your heart on parchment, doomed." At the corner, you stumble on something strange. A small alleyway with a wooden roof hastily built between two buildings, barely head height. Underneath, a makeshift booth where 3 scribes sit at a shared table, copying documents in the rain. Yes, in the rain. They have contraptions, dripping canvas hoods over their work, waxed leather sleeves for their arms, and one fellow has fashioned a waterproof desk tent using 2 poles and what looks like the flap of a merchant's awning. They are utterly focused. You stand and watch, expecting them to stop. They don't. One looks up briefly and says, "Deadlines." Another adds, "Rain makes the ink weep. Sometimes that's what the prose needs." You grin. Florence is nothing if not romantically impractical. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some scribes believed rainy days were best for writing poetry. They claimed the moisture in the air softened the ink, gave it soul. There's a recorded case of a scribe refusing to copy a legal manuscript until the sky has expressed itself adequately. Historians still argue whether this was genuine belief or a cleverly veiled attempt at procrastination. You continue on and pass a set of marble steps, where a group of students sit huddled under a borrowed tapestry, reading aloud from a soaked manuscript. Every few lines, they stop to shake out the pages and squint. A teacher stands nearby under an absurdly wide hat, correcting their Latin between sneezes. A small black cat tiptoes between them, shaking water off its paws and pausing every often to stare disdainfully at the wet margins. Just past them, you find a statue of Minerva, her shield streaked with rain, her stone eyes eternally unbothered. Someone has draped a scroll in her outstretched hand. The ink is unreadable now, but you recognize the gesture. Even wisdom needs a good umbrella. You press on, boots squelching gently, until you find a hidden courtyard surrounded by tiled colonnades. In the center, beneath a crumbling pergola, a young woman writes with a brush on parchment weighed down by stones. You approach cautiously. She smiles. "The rain, it slows the ink. It forces me to think." You nod. "Also, it hides my spelling mistakes." There it is, the Florentine philosophy in a single sentence. blend beauty and failure until they're indistinguishable. Behind her, ivy climbs the walls like script without syntax, tangled and beautiful. A faint scent of wet parchment and rosemary fills the air. You sit nearby on a stone bench, slick with rain, cloak bunching awkwardly. The woman continues writing, each stroke deliberate, her brush trailing just behind the drizzle. You listen to the rhythm of her work, the drip of water, the hush of footsteps beyond the archway. Somewhere, a bell chimes, muffled by the weather, but no less certain. Florence breathes even in silence, especially in silence. You close your eyes for a moment, rain cooling your face, and picture all the words lost to storms. Letters never sent, poems blurred, contracts erased and rewritten, histories softened by water into myth. And somehow, the city is still here, damp, poetic, unfinished, just like its stories.
You rise from the bench slowly, leaving behind a cloak-shaped watermark that will vanish before anyone else sees it, like most things in Florence, fleeting, poetic, slightly damp. The rain hums its lullaby across rooftops as you wander into a small piazza, half hidden behind mismatched buildings, where walls lean inward like gossiping neighbors. At the center stands a fountain, dry, ironically, but ringed by 4 rain-catch basins overflowing into puddles that now mirror the surrounding arches. A group of older men plays chess beneath one of those arches, their cloaks pulled tight, their hats set at resolute angles that say, yes, it's raining, and yes, checkmate is still on the table. You approach, careful not to splash. One man grunts a greeting. Another gestures toward the board and mutters, "The queen's soaked, but she's still deadly." It's here you catch today's mainstream historical fact. In late medieval Florence, piazzas were as much places of debate and leisure as they were of trade. And rain didn't cancel anything, it just changed the seating. Philosophers debated under dripping cornices. Bakers haggled beneath shawls. Old men played chess with stones for pieces when wood got too soggy. As the bishop's rook falls with a satisfying squish, you notice a row of pigeons taking shelter on a carved lintel. One appears to be dozing. Another glares down at the game as though offended by the black pawn's strategy. A small boy runs into the piazza, holding a bundle of folded paper. He pauses near the fountain, carefully unfolds a single sheet, and sets it into the water. It's a boat, poorly folded, uneven, already tilting. But it floats. The men at the chessboard pause to watch. No one speaks. The moment feels weightier than it should. And here's your quirky tidbit. During especially wet seasons, Florentine children would fold city decrees into paper boats, usually discarded pages from sermons or tax lists, and race them in street gutters. The practice was called La Regatta dei Proclami, the decree regatta. Entire games evolved around which boat made it to the next piazza without sinking. Some were inked with blessings, others curses. The boy's boat makes a graceful arc around the fountain, then catches a small current flowing toward the alley. He runs after it, barefoot, cloak flapping like a storm-wrung flag. The men chuckle. A woman from a nearby window leans out, clutching a steaming mug. "He wins if it makes it past the baker's door," she says. "He loses if the cat gets it." You turn, curious, and yes, there is the cat, perched regally atop a rain barrel, watching the paper boat like a small, furry god of fate. The game is on. You follow the boy and his boat through winding alleyways, dodging puddles and overhanging signs. The boat wobbles, dips, rights itself. It passes 2 lovers sharing a dripping scarf, a tailor lamenting his umbrella's betrayal, and a trio of nuns poking at a wheel of cheese that has rolled into the gutter. "It's blessed now," one says, or "doomed," another adds. And then, disaster. A gust of wind, sharper than the others, catches the boat and flips it into a puddle by a bootmaker's stall. It spins once, twice, then folds in on itself like a sigh. The boy slows, kneels, scoops up the limp paper with both hands. His face says everything. Not surprise, not sadness, just the quiet conclusion that boats made of rules rarely sail far. You approach gently. He looks up and shrugs.
I used a tax notice. Maybe the ink made it sink. Smart kid. He stands and walks off, clutching the soggy bundle with the vague reverence of someone who might try again. Florentines don't fear small failures. They turn them into tradition. You circle back toward the piazza, where the men have resumed their game. The queen stands again, still soaked, still deadly. One man looks up and says, "She always survives the storm." Historians still argue whether these piazzas fostered democracy, gossip, or both. What's agreed upon is this: rain or shine, Florentines gathered here, with cloaks, boards, boats, and arguments. The weather was never an excuse not to engage. It was part of the debate. You linger for a moment at the edge of the square, watching as another boy sets a boat afloat. This one sails straighter, bolder. Someone cheers. A woman drops a coin into a puddle as a blessing. Above, a window opens, and someone sings. Not loudly, just enough to fill the square with something warmer than rain. Florence, you realize, doesn't wait for sun to feel bright. It lights itself. You leave the square behind, drawn down a quieter path now, where the buildings cast longer shadows and the rain whispers instead of claps. This is a residential lane, the kind not marked on any tourist map. Lined with tall shuttered windows, flower boxes half abandoned to the drizzle, and doors so old they sigh when opened. Florence is quieter here, more introspective, as if the rain has settled into the wood and stone, and the city is simply exhaling. You pause beside a low wall blanketed in creeping moss, water trickling steadily down its sides like a forgotten fountain. Above it hangs a metal bracket, empty, but unmistakably once used to hold a lantern. You imagine it flickering in another century, lighting the way for soaked poets and insomniac philosophers alike. Ahead, a cloaked figure walks a donkey slowly down the lane, hooves clipping softly on the slick cobbles. Draped across the donkey's back is a stack of canvas-wrapped parcels, some long and narrow, some squat and bulging. The figure nods as he passes. "Delivery?" you ask, more to be friendly than inquisitive. "Umbrellas," he replies, then adds, deadpan, "for the future." Ah, that kind of day. Here's your mainstream historical fact. While umbrellas were well known in ancient civilizations, they didn't catch on quickly in medieval Europe. In Florence, the idea of shielding oneself from rain was considered suspiciously delicate. Cloaks were a matter of pride, stoicism, and drama. Still, by the late 15th century, merchants and travelers began importing umbrellas, or ombrelli, from the East. And Florence, naturally, had opinions. Some praised their elegance, others mocked their absurdity. A few priests condemned them outright as vanity incarnate. If the Lord wished us dry, one sermon claimed, he would have made the sky blink. You turn the corner and find yourself outside a modest workshop with an overhanging sign that reads, "Per coprire il cielo," to cover the sky. Beneath it, umbrellas. Dozens of them, hung from pegs, leaning in barrels, fluttering faintly in the breeze like mushrooms waiting for a storm. The shopkeeper waves you in. She's a short woman with wiry arms and the look of someone who's argued her way through at least 3 guild tribunals, and won 2 of them. "Looking for practical or poetic?" she asks, already sorting through options. "We've got rain beaters, sun deniers, love letter shades, and one that whistles if you open it too fast." You blink. Poetic, I think. She hands you a folded piece with a carved wooden handle and a canopy of pale green linen. It's stitched with lines of text, barely legible now from where. You tilt your head and read, "Let the sky fall gentle as a favor." It's from a canceled wedding, she adds. Still works. You open it cautiously. It blooms like a flower, lopsided, imperfect, and utterly charming. You hold it above your head, and for the first time all day, the rain does not find your shoulders. Outside the shop, a small girl points at your umbrella and whispers, "Look, the rain avoids them." Her mother hushes her. It avoids no one, she says, but it chooses where to linger. Here's your quirky tidbit. At least one Florentine noble commissioned an umbrella laced with perfume, scented threads that released lavender as the canopy unfolded. It was meant to soften the smell of wet courtyards. Unfortunately, the thread dissolved after 10 uses, and one guest fainted from the mixture of lavender and mildew. Still, the trend briefly caught on. Historians still argue whether umbrellas represented true practicality or quiet rebellion, defiance not against nature, but against suffering as virtue. You wander the streets now with your poetic umbrella held aloft like a flag of peaceful resistance. It doesn't block all the rain. Some still sneaks in sideways, as if the sky can't resist a bit of teasing. But somehow it feels like a conversation now, not a scolding. You pass a baker shading her cooling loaves with a patched parasol. A scholar uses a broken umbrella like a walking stick, muttering calculations under his breath. A group of teenagers pass around one large canopy, laughing every time a gust of wind tries to steal it. They do not stop walking. Florence is beginning to look like a field of slow-blooming flowers. You pause at a fountain and close your umbrella for a moment. The sound of the rain feels clearer now, fresher, as though it's applauding you gently for choosing poetry. And you realize maybe the umbrella was never about staying dry. Maybe it was about declaring, just for a moment, that you could meet the rain on your own terms. You tilt your head back and let a single drop land on your nose. The umbrella feels oddly empowering in your hand now, as if you're not just avoiding the rain, but participating in some kind of unspoken dance with it. With each step, the rhythm of water hitting canvas above and stone below becomes your soundtrack. Florence doesn't just rain, it composes. You drift toward the Santo Spirito district, where the buildings are plainer but the spirit is rowdier. This is the artisan quarter, where blacksmiths, coopers, soap makers, and painters all share gossip, complaints, and rainwater. The scent of iron and wet clay hangs in the air, along with the faint hint of bread that's been left too long near steam. A tanner slaps a hide over a drying rack. Useless. It droops like a defeated flag. He looks up at the sky and mutters, "Of course." Here's your mainstream historical fact. The leather trade was enormous in Florence, but rain posed serious problems. Tanning involved a mix of chemicals, oils, and processes sensitive to moisture. If the weather turned suddenly, entire batches could spoil. As a result, many tanners developed elaborate indoor setups, or learned to pray with both urgency and sarcasm. A boy runs past you carrying a crate of soap, slipping slightly on the slick stones. From behind, a woman calls, "If he drops it, we're all clean for a week." You turn the corner and enter a courtyard that feels like a half-finished painting. A group of painters stands under the protection of a tiled arcade, surrounded by canvases covered in drips and streaks. One of them holds up his hands and sighs. The Madonna has tears now. Divine intervention or just poor shelter? They laugh, loudly, proudly. Florence loves a joke about art, even sacred art. Nearby, a cooper struggles to move a barrel across the slick ground. You offer a hand. He nods and mutters, "Rain expands the wood. Good for wine, bad for pride." Together, you ease the barrel into a dry corner. "This one's for vinegar," he says, almost apologetic. And here's your quirky tidbit. Cooper guilds sometimes held competitions during rainy seasons, timed challenges to build barrels using soaked staves. The goal was speed and precision under pressure. Winners received coins, applause, and the right to boast endlessly for one entire feast cycle. As you leave the courtyard, you spot a young woman on her knees chalking prayers into the wet stone, each letter already dissolving. Her face is calm. You kneel beside her and ask, "Will the rain take them before God sees?" She smiles faintly. "Maybe, but I think he listens as they're written, not after." You keep walking. Scholars still argue whether this mix of piety and practicality defined Florence's artisan class, or whether they were simply making do with what the weather gave them. There's certainly no shortage of saints painted with umbrellas, or at least suspiciously umbrella-shaped halos. You pass a glassmaker's shop next, where a half-dozen apprentices cluster around an oven, its glow defiant in the gloom. Rain patters on the windows in rhythm with the bellow's breath. Inside, someone is shaping what appears to be a raindrop itself. Delicate, clear, impossibly precise. You step closer, peering through the fogged glass. The artisan sees you, nods once, then holds the drop aloft in long tongs. It gleams like liquid time. Then, without a word, he drops it into a bucket of water where it vanishes in a hiss of steam. Art in Florence isn't about permanence. It's about the moment. Farther on, you duck into a colonnade where a group of tailors has gathered with needles and thread. They're working by candlelight, muttering, stitching, and occasionally swatting at leaks from the ceiling. "We're waterproofing with poetry today," one says, gesturing to an embroidered line on a cloak. "Bless this drizzle and all who wear it." You run your fingers across the thread. It's damp, delicate, but somehow holding. One tailor offers you a spool. "Want to try? The rain makes better knots." You decline gently, but smile. Florence teaches you to admire what you don't attempt. As you exit the colonnade, a gust of wind tugs your umbrella slightly sideways. You adjust it with the casual grace of someone who has accepted they're never in full control. You glance up. The clouds are not done, not by a long shot. But neither are you. The artisan district has its own rhythm. Less poetic than the piazzas, perhaps, but more grounded. Every puddle is measured in splashes. Every complaint is a song. Every ruined barrel is a future conversation starter. And in that rhythm, you find something steady. The umbrella in your hand no longer feels like a barrier. It's a tool. You follow the smell of wood smoke and onions now, tugged toward the food stalls that refuse to close even on the soggiest days. Florence may respect the rain, but it does not skip meals. You step into a marketplace still clinging to life, where canvas tarps sag under water's weight and barrels have been repurposed into soup stands. Steam curls in romantic spirals from every pot. Merchants shout not because of the rain, but because shouting is a form of seasoning here. A man stands behind a cauldron of thick stew, ladling it with the grace of a maestro. "It tastes better in the rain," he calls, wiping his brow with a damp sleeve. "Everything does." Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval Florentines ate communally more often than you might expect, especially during feast days or market festivals. Vendors set up makeshift kitchens in courtyards, piazzas, even alleys. Rain meant fewer customers, but it also meant slower cooking, simmering pots that turned onions into poetry and lentils into lullabies. You buy a bowl of something fragrant and unfamiliar. The vendor says it's soup for people who remember to be grateful. You nod, though you're not entirely sure what's in it. It's hot, it's salty, it tastes like a story your grandmother once told you in a dream. You find shelter beneath a drooping awning where 3 strangers already sit, balancing food on their knees. No one speaks at first. Rain fills the space with gentle percussion. Then one of them says, "You look like someone who's walked far." You smile. "I've floated more than walked." They chuckle, and suddenly you're part of their table. Here's your quirky tidbit. There was once a soup in Florence only served during rainstorms. Called zuppa di malinconia, melancholy stew. It was said to cure both wet feet and unspoken grief. Recipes varied, but always included onions, sage, and exactly 3 beans. Any more, and the sadness wouldn't know where to sit. A boy passes by offering toasted chestnuts from a metal pan. He jingles a tiny bell with every step, calling, "Warmth for your hands, warmth for your soul." You buy a handful, their paper wrapper steaming in the cool air. One chestnut splits open in your palm with a little sigh of heat. You watch as puddles around the market begin to reflect the glow of braziers and torchlight. The rain hasn't stopped, but Florence has shifted. Now it's less a storm, more a dinner guest, one who comes uninvited, eats too much, but always brings poetry. A small girl beside you licks her spoon and says, "My nonna says thunder is just God dragging chairs." You nod. That checks out. A few stalls down, a woman ladles broth into cups and mutters to each customer, "For strength." You don't know if she's a cook or a witch, but either way, it feels like a blessing. Scholars still argue whether food rituals during bad weather were rooted in practicality or superstition. Was warm soup truly medicinal, or did it simply feel like magic because it arrived when most needed? Florence, ever theatrical, probably never saw the need to separate the two. You finish your soup slowly, savoring the way it turns rain into background music. A man with a lopsided hat stands up and declares, "We eat better wet." No one disagrees. One woman toasts the rain itself, lifting her bowl high and letting a few drops fall in before taking a sip. You follow her lead. The moment tastes like sage and laughter. Later, you meander out of the market, stepping over wet sawdust and abandoned tomato stems. The smell of roasted garlic clings to your sleeves. Your umbrella glistens with tiny stars of water. You pass a shuttered bakery with a note pinned to the door. "Gone to nap. Bread was too soft from the weather. So was I." You smile. Florence doesn't apologize for softness. It seasons it. And as you step back into the flow of the city, you realize food in the rain isn't just about warmth. It's about proving again and again that even soaked to the bone, you're still invited to the table.
You leave the market behind, belly warm and mind softened, wandering with no clear aim. The rain is lighter now, falling in wispy sheets that shimmer briefly before disappearing into cobblestones, cloaks, and curls of steam. The streets seem quieter here, as though the city has finished its performance and is backstage, unbuttoning its costume. You find yourself walking along a narrow canal, its waters rising subtly with the afternoon's accumulation. The stone ledges beside it are slick, reflecting blurry halos of lanterns that have already been lit against the gray. A bridge arches overhead, not grand, just practical. A few figures stand atop it, watching the current. One tosses a handful of breadcrumbs into the water and sighs, "Let the ducks inherit the kingdom." There are no ducks, just time and water. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Florence's waterways were central to its function and beauty, though by the late Middle Ages, many smaller canals were being bricked over to control flooding and disease. Still, some remained, threading through neighborhoods, feeding workshops and mines alike. They became metaphors as much as utilities. You pause on the bridge, umbrella tilted, watching reflections ripple. Behind you, an old man with a fishing rod sits with no bait, no hook, just line, and patience. You ask if he's fishing. "I'm remembering," he replies. You nod. That feels about right. A cat slinks past your ankles, clearly on important business. It shakes one paw mid-step, as though the puddle offended it personally. The rain begins to pick up again, soft but steady, as if testing your resolve. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some Florentines believed that certain types of rain brought specific dreams. A thin mist like this one, said to spark memories from before birth. Midwives whispered it made babies dream in the womb. One poet claimed it rained so gently on his 14th birthday that he remembered a life he'd never lived. You glance up at the clouds. They don't seem to disagree. Wandering onward, you pass a small shrine built into a wall, one of those little alcoves where someone's placed a candle and a wilted sprig of lavender. Above it is an inscription, "May you never walk dry and alone." A line of wax has run down the bricks, hardened like teardrops long since forgiven. A woman passes you pushing a cart with an umbrella lashed to it. Inside, a chicken stares at you balefully from under a wool blanket. The woman meets your eye and says, "He hates the rain, but loves the attention." You tip your umbrella to both. At a tiny square lined with shuttered wine bars, you find a group of older women playing cards beneath a veranda.
One leans back, pointing at the sky, and says, "That's the good kind of rain. It doesn't make your bones complain." Another snorts, "Speak for yourself. Mine have unionized." They all laugh. You join them for a while, not to play, just to sit and listen. Their voices braid together like yarn, soft, tangled, full of stories. One woman says she proposed to her husband during a thunderstorm. "He didn't hear me, but he nodded, so here we are." Scholars still argue whether Florence's culture of open-air conversation, the benches, the doorways, the shared thresholds, was born of architecture or temperament. Perhaps it was simply that a rainy city needs places for stories to land without sinking. You leave the square and find a low archway where someone has etched dozens of tiny faces into the stone. Smiling, frowning, yawning. Rain beads in their carved eyes. One seems to wink at you. Or maybe that's just the angle. As you pass, a boy with a stick trails behind his mother, tapping every puddle. That one's deep. That one's ambitious. That one's dreaming. His mother offers no reply, just pulls her hood tighter and keeps walking. You step into a narrow passage where the walls nearly touch, and find a violinist playing beneath a dripping gutter. His instrument looks older than you are, the music older still. You can't tell if he's playing for tips, for ghosts, or just for the rain itself. And then, just before the music fades, you hear him hum. The melody catches you. The rhythm of water becomes a kind of heartbeat. And you walk on, into the gathering mist, thinking, Florence doesn't offer answers in the rain, only questions that feel like poems.
You drift into the Oltre Nano now, that quieter side of Florence across the river where artisans have longer beards, and the rain seems to linger just a little more sentimentally. The cobblestones here are uneven, older, less eager to impress. They shine like wet marble teeth in the dusk. You're still walking with your poetic umbrella, now patched in one corner with a scrap of red cloth you don't remember adding. A gift from the city, maybe. Florence does that, patches you without asking. Here's your mainstream historical fact. This part of the city, beyond the Arno, was once considered the working Florence, home to blacksmiths, bookbinders, stonemasons, and quiet rebels. The Medici ruled across the river. Over here, people rolled their eyes at them and kept making beautiful things. You pass a low, squat workshop with smoke curling lazily from the chimney and a sign out front. Silence is charged extra. A bell chimes as you lean near the doorway, and an old man looks up from a bench cluttered with tiny gears and tangled chains. "Rain shortens time," he says without prompting, "makes hours feel heavier. We charge for that, too." You nod politely. He gestures toward the sky. Florence teaches you to work with wet fingers, or not work at all. And here's your quirky tidbit. There's a documented guild fine from 1491 where a silversmith was penalized not for tardiness, but for arriving too dry, implying he hadn't walked through the storm like everyone else. The implied insult? That he took a shortcut, or worse, a carriage. You continue past rows of houses where laundry hangs limp in the drizzle, some of it likely dry before the sky changed its mind. A girl peeks out from a window above and shouts, "Watch out, that puddle has opinions." You smile and sidestep just in time. The puddle gurgles approvingly. At a corner wine shop, three friends lean against a barrel beneath a stretched canvas. One is playing a flute badly, the second is eating figs, and the third is arguing with himself about the ethics of drinking before sundown. It's very much past sundown. "Rain is a reason," says the fig eater, "not an excuse." You nod, accepting the wisdom. They offer you a glass of something deep and red. You sip. It tastes like old wood, secrets, and a hint of plum. The flute player toasts the sky and says, "To weather-proof friendships." You toast back, because why not? Scholars still argue whether wine shops or churches kept the city together during bad weather. It was likely both, and whichever one offered better bread that week.
As you walk on, the streets grow thinner again. A cat darts across your path, tail high. You see the glint of lantern light ahead and turn toward it, finding yourself in a tiny cloister where someone has built a temporary shrine from old crates, wax-dripped bottles, and a handful of pebbles arranged in a spiral. A sign reads, "Thank you, rain, for making me stay still long enough to notice this." You stand there a while. The longer you do, the more the stones around you seem to breathe. Not literally, but enough that your boots feel unnecessary, your umbrella weightless. Then, just as you consider sitting, someone passes behind you and whispers, "The rain tells its own time." You turn, but no one's there. You walk again. A tailor's candle flickers behind frosted glass. A pot clangs in a kitchen somewhere. A dog sneezes from under a cart. These are the sounds of Florence tucking itself in. You approach a bridge now, Ponte Vecchio, though not as tourists see it. At night, in the rain, when the shops are closed and the jewelry sleeps, and only the stones themselves remain awake. You walk its length in silence. No gold glimmers, no crowds jostle, just the rain whispering secrets into the river's ear. Below, the Arno moves slowly, carrying time in fragments, a pedal here, a note there, a tiny paper boat no bigger than a dream. It turns once in the current, then disappears. You reach the far end of the bridge. Florence, it seems, has followed you. Or maybe you followed it. Either way, you're not alone. You descend from the Ponte Vecchio into a soft maze of lanes lit by flickering lanterns, their glow puddling on the wet ground like spilled candle wax. Everything is slick and shining now. Cobblestones, windows, even the city's mood. Florence at this hour feels like a dream that's just remembered it's supposed to be beautiful. You walk slower, not because you're tired, but because there's too much to notice when the world is damp and glowing. The bell tower tolls once, low and velvet rich, a reminder that time moves even when you've stopped trying to measure it. You turn into a courtyard framed by sleeping orange trees. The scent of citrus weaves with the smell of wet stone and distant wood smoke. In the center stands a stone bench where someone's left a folded handkerchief soaked through and forgotten. You sit beside it anyway. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Public courtyards in medieval Florence were more than open space. They were stages for everything from sermons to secret trysts. Some even had rain rituals, like catching the first drops in a silver dish or reciting verses backwards to keep the worst of the storm away. Tonight, this courtyard is quiet, but not empty. You hear the faint scrape of a broom, then see a caretaker slowly sweeping puddles off the flagstones. Not with any urgency, more like he's persuading the water to go somewhere else. He nods to you. "If I stop sweeping," he says, "they'll think the rain has won." You stay a while, listening to his rhythm. Sweep, pause, drip, sweep. Then, from one of the darkened windows above, music drifts out. Plucked strings, delicate and strange. Not quite a song, more like someone tuning their thoughts. It rises and falls in time with the breeze, as if the house itself is humming. You smile. Florence hums when it rains. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Florentine households believed that playing music during rainstorms would anchor the house against misfortune. Lutes, harps, even tin spoons on tabletops were recruited into this effort. It wasn't about melody, it was about making sound in defiance of silence. Scholars still argue whether this tradition was superstition, social bonding, or simply the byproduct of people getting stuck indoors with nothing better to do. Whatever its origin, it remains one of the most tender footnotes in Florence's soggy archive. You wander out of the courtyard, following the music, until it fades into other sounds. The shuffle of passing feet, the creak of a shutter half closed, the tiny splash of a bird hopping through a puddle. A light rain continues to fall. You pass a stone well where someone has tossed coins not for luck, but probably out of boredom. One glints at you from the edge. You leave it alone. Let it dream of wishes unspoken. You turn down a street so narrow your umbrella brushes both walls. Halfway through, you pass a laundry line strung stubbornly overhead, dripping rhythmically onto a wooden chair someone has left beneath it. A note is pinned to the seat, reserved for someone who doesn't mind. Florence is polite even in its metaphors. As you emerge from the alley, the Duomo appears in the distance, half shrouded by fog, its massive dome rising like a thought too big to finish. Rain rolls off its face, down gargoyles and saints carved into the marble, as if the building itself is weeping gently for how long it has stood. You draw closer. A lone figure walks the square, hood up, hands in sleeves, whispering something too soft to hear. You watch him circle the cathedral once, then vanish between pillars. You walk to the base of the Duomo and lean against its cold side. The rain falls more insistently now, but you're already wet, and it doesn't matter. Florence doesn't mind how soaked you are. It only minds if you forget to notice. You close your eyes. Listen. The city speaks in water, in cracked shutters, in humming strings and empty chairs and the memory of laughter around bowls of soup. You realize with the quiet certainty that only rain can bring that Florence doesn't resist the weather. It rewrites itself.
The square around the Duomo is nearly empty now, save for the steady murmur of rain and the occasional flicker of movement behind curtains. You linger beneath one of the massive arches, umbrella lowered, letting the stone embrace you. It's cold, but not unkind, like an old teacher who never raised their voice but always knew when you were lying. From here, the cathedral's surface glistens. Marble veins darken with moisture, making patterns that seem ancient and intentional. If you stare long enough, the rain makes it breathe. You cross the square toward a small side chapel, less ornate than the main cathedral, but more inviting. Its heavy wooden door is slightly ajar, just enough to whisper welcome. You enter quietly. Inside, candles flicker in tall iron holders, casting warm circles of light that puddle on the floor like honey. A few figures sit scattered in pews, silent and still. Rain taps gently against stained glass windows, turning their colors into trembling watercolors. Here's your mainstream historical fact. During the Middle Ages, chapels across Florence often remained open during storms, not just for prayer, but for shelter, warmth, and communal stillness. These spaces weren't just sacred, they were necessary. They offered peace that wasn't dependent on sunshine. You find a seat near the back and let yourself settle into the rhythm of dripping wax and whispered breath. The silence is thick, but gentle. It doesn't demand anything from you. A monk sweeps slowly near the altar, his robes rustling like dry leaves. He hums a tune you don't recognize, but one that fits the weather perfectly. It's not sacred, it's domestic, a lullaby for bricks and candles. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some monks in Florence believed that rain was the breath of sleeping angels, and that each droplet carried a small forgiveness. On rainy days, they washed not just their garments, but their walls, saying, "Let the sky cleanse what we overlook." You look up at the vaulted ceiling and wonder what it's heard. As you leave the chapel, you step back into the city with quieter feet. Rain is still falling, but now it feels like it's following you gently, not chasing you. You wander toward the academic quarter, where buildings cluster around ancient libraries and cloisters with walls so thick the outside world barely whispers through. Here, stone staircases curl like secrets, and rain pools in forgotten corners no one sweeps. A student sits beneath a carved arch, scribbling into a water-stained notebook. She looks up as you pass. Trying to finish before the page turns to soup, she says. You offer your umbrella. She declines. It's part of the charm. You nod and keep walking, the sound of pen on wet paper fading behind you. Scholars still argue whether Florence's relationship with the rain was symbolic or circumstantial, whether its poetry about storms and umbrellas masked a practical need or revealed something deeper. Maybe it's both. Maybe everything here is.
You pass a tower that leans ever so slightly, like it's trying to hear better. A pigeon flaps from one corner, startled by nothing. You round the base of the tower and find a small plaque half covered in moss. You wipe it clean. It reads, "For those who walked, even when it rained sideways." Florence has always admired persistence. You find a bench beneath a fig tree, its leaves trembling under the weight of droplets. You sit, and the world feels muted in the most comforting way, like a city under blankets. A couple passes by, sharing one umbrella, bickering in low voices about where they're going, then laughing a moment later. You catch only one phrase, "Let's be lost a little longer." You close your eyes and let that linger. Maybe the rain doesn't delay you. Maybe it reminds you there's nowhere urgent to be, not when the sky is telling stories on your shoulders. You rise from the fig-shaded bench with joints a little slower, footsteps a little heavier, but heart somehow lighter. The rain is softer now, less like weather, more like memory. It kisses rooftops and curls around doorways, as if saying goodbye in advance. You head down a gentle slope toward the outskirts of the city walls, where Florence begins to dissolve into gardens, orchards, and quiet estates behind stone walls. It's calmer here, quieter. Even the rain seems to tiptoe. To your left, a low gate stands open. Beyond it, a walled garden yawns, heavy with wet roses, terracotta pots, and thyme. No sign tells you to enter, but no one tells you not to either. So, you do. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In late medieval Florence, gardens weren't just for nobles. Small plots of land, some public, some private, were carved into the city's bones. They were used to grow herbs, grapes, and quiet thoughts. Rainy days were considered perfect for pruning, not plants, but worries. You wander between stone paths laced with moss, stopping to touch the soft heads of rain-damp rosemary. The air here smells like basil, old clay, and patience. A gardener emerges from behind a hedge, carrying a basket of lemons the color of stubborn sunlight. He's soaked to the knees, smiling. "Rain sweetens everything," he says. He offers you a lemon. You accept it with both hands, as if it might bruise. Its skin is warm from his grip, cool from the air. You tuck it into your cloak like treasure. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Florentines believed placing a lemon on your windowsill during a storm would keep bad dreams away. Others said it would invite them in, just the good ones. There's no agreement, just an unspoken consensus that lemons matter. You find a stone bench tucked beneath an arbor and sit again, letting time continue without your help. A snail inches past your boot. A bee lands on a soaked bloom, decides it isn't worth it, and buzzes off. Farther down the path, a tiny shrine holds a statue of a saint who's clearly lost his nose, but kept his dignity. A candle flickers in a storm jar beside him. Someone has left a handful of almonds in an offering dish. You don't know the ritual, but you like the idea. You walk on. The garden opens into a sloping orchard, where olive trees tilt like old men sharing secrets. The grass underfoot squishes softly. You pause by a low wall to peer over the edge, where fields fade into mist and the sky forgets where it ends. A young couple sits on a fallen log, cloaks huddled together, sharing a book that's probably too wet to read. One of them is whispering, the other is asleep on their shoulder. No one interrupts. Florence lets its love stories unfold quietly. Scholars still argue whether the city's gardens were originally intended for spiritual reflection or practical cultivation. The truth is likely both: basil and prayers, sage and poetry. Florence never really saw a difference between food and philosophy. You loop back toward the garden gate, raindrops tapping gently on the leaves above. The lemon shifts in your cloak as you walk. You think about giving it to someone, but can't decide who deserves it yet. You exit into the lane once more, leaving behind rosemary and silence. Back on the main road, you spot a small tavern glowing like a lantern on legs. Inside, laughter swells, then fades again as the door creaks. You pass it without entering. Not yet. The road climbs slightly, winding past shuttered homes with tiled roofs sloping like the backs of dozing horses. You pause near a gutter, where rainwater runs down in a steady stream. A boy crouches beside it, sending a cork boat on its journey. He looks up. "This one's got a name," he says. "Hope it survives." You ask, "What's its name?" "Tomorrow." He grins. You grin back. The boat vanishes around the bend. Florence at night in the rain feels like a city still righting itself. Not finished, not perfect, just beautifully wet and awake. You walk on, lemon warm in your pocket, umbrella like a friend, and rain like a song that only ends when you stop listening. You follow the winding path upward, away from the garden, away from the tavern that laughed without you, and toward the hills that cradle Florence like an old lullaby. The city softens behind you, its outlines blurred by mist and lantern light. It no longer presses itself into your senses, it simply lingers. The rain becomes finer here, like sifted silk, brushing your cheeks and eyelashes without ever fully falling. Up ahead, a tall cypress leans slightly into the road, as if it's been eavesdropping for centuries and can no longer keep its curiosity to itself. You pass beneath it, umbrella folded now. The air smells of damp bark, sweet hay, and a faint trace of something herbal, thyme perhaps, or memory. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The hills surrounding Florence were once dotted with monasteries and retreats, places where artists, monks, and philosophers went to dry out both bodies and ideas. These high places were thought to inspire clarity and, of course, to provide views, especially after the rain, when the city gleamed like polished marble. You round a bend and come upon a small stone chapel, its walls damp, its roof streaked with moss, its doors flung open like arms. Inside, you can just make out the shape of a figure lighting a candle. You hesitate, then step in. The chapel holds maybe 5 pews and a single stained glass window depicting an angel who looks mildly inconvenienced. The candlelight flickers wildly, either from the breeze or from trying too hard to be holy. The figure turns out to be a teenage girl in a hooded cloak, muttering softly as she arranges flowers in a chipped vase. She sees you, nods once, and says, "It's not for anyone in particular, just in case someone needs it." You smile. Florence always prepares for invisible guests. Here's your quirky tidbit. It was once custom in rural Florence to leave a lit candle near the altar during rainstorms, so that wandering souls or wandering friends could find warmth. Some claimed these candles never truly went out, only changed shape into the next day's sunrise. You sit for a moment in the pew farthest from the door. Outside, the rain drips from eaves in a lazy rhythm, and the angel in the glass window seems to regard you with slight approval. The girl finishes her flower arrangement, slightly lopsided, stubbornly cheerful, and slips out without another word. You hear her boots on stone, fading down the path. You stay just long enough to feel the stillness wrap around you like a borrowed blanket. Then you too rise and step back into the night. Florence stretches below now, a bowl of flickering lights and steaming rooftops. The Duomo dome gleams faintly like the yolk of a broken egg, resting gently on the dish of the city. You breathe it in, the rooftops, the bells, the chimneys puffing like sleepy dragons. You can smell bread again, or perhaps it's just the ghost of breakfast. Scholars still argue whether the hills inspired more prayer or more poetry. Truthfully, no one climbed them without bringing back both. You begin your descent, slower now, more mindful of the slick stones. The umbrella swings gently at your side, its stitched verse trailing behind you in droplets. The lemon in your pocket is still warm. Halfway down, you pass a bench carved with initials and hearts, all softened by time and moss. You run your fingers along one name, Julietta. There's no Romeo, just her. Maybe that was enough. A dog pads past you without a sound, trailing a broken leash. He doesn't look lost, just ahead of schedule. You pause again near a wooden railing, gazing over the rooftops. It's late, though you don't feel tired, just quiet, the way rain teaches you to be. Below, a bell chimes once, then twice. The sound carries, not loud, but low, like a voice saying, "Still here." You answer, aloud or not, "Me too."
You reach the foot of the hill and find yourself back within the gentle tangle of Florence's older quarters, where alleyways whisper more than they speak, and doorways seem to remember who used to stand in them. The rain, too, has changed. It's quieter now, barely more than mist, like Florence's exhaling slowly in its sleep. Your boots make soft squelches against the cobblestones, now slick as spilled ink. Each puddle reflects the world in watercolor, upside-down windows, lanterns stretched into stars, your own silhouette made taller by the wet. You wander past a narrow bookshop, whose doors open despite the hour. Inside, the light is golden and warm, pooling across old wood floors and curling up into the corners like a cat. You step in. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In Renaissance Florence, booksellers were more than merchants. They were gatekeepers of culture, often doubling as editors, printers, and philosophers. And while few could read, everyone respected those who could. Rainy nights were prime time for quiet browsing, hushed debates, and poetry whispered between strangers. The shopkeeper doesn't greet you. He's asleep in a chair, arms folded, glasses tilted, a book still open in his lap. You tiptoe past him as respectfully as one tiptoes through a chapel. The books smell like time and mildew and forgotten secrets. You run a finger across a row of faded spines, titles half erased, paper edges warped from age and perhaps weather. You pull one down at random, On the Dignity of Clouds. You open it, and a folded page falls out. On it, a poem, handwritten in ink that's bled into the parchment. If you walk with the rain, you won't arrive dry, but you'll arrive differently. No signature, no title. You tuck it into your cloak beside the lemon. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Florentine poets held a belief that writing should only be done during storms because clear skies favor lies. A few even splashed water on their paper before composing, calling it a blessing of unpredictability. As you leave the shop, the bell above the door tings softly. The shopkeeper stirs, but does not wake. A dog, curled beside his chair, lifts one eyebrow in polite acknowledgement. Back in the street, you pass a fountain where someone has placed a small umbrella over a stone lion's head. The water trickles on regardless. You imagine the lion deeply unimpressed. A narrow balcony above you is strung with ribbons of red cloth, fluttering faintly in the damped breeze. A sign dangles from the ironwork. Caution, thinking in progress. Florence is always mid-thought. You walk beside the Arno again, its current thicker now, holding the day's reflections like a stubborn journal. Boats rock gently against their moorings. Somewhere, you hear the clink of glass and the low, warm sound of a lullaby being hummed off-key. You pause at the bridge, not the grand one this time, but a smaller, quieter span, used mostly by those with nowhere in particular to go. You lean on the rail, watch the water. Drop the folded poem into the river. It drifts, unfolds, softens, then vanishes. Scholars still argue whether the Arno is a giver or a taker, but most agree it remembers what you forget. You cross the bridge slowly, letting your fingertips graze the damp stone. The rain is barely there now, just a breath, just a memory hanging in the air. You stop beneath a tall fig tree growing from a crack in the wall. It shouldn't be there, and yet it is. Florentine gardeners call it figlia della pioggia, daughter of the rain.
You reach up and pluck a single fig. It's underripe and probably awful. You keep it anyway. As you tuck it beside your lemon, something shifts inside you. Not a revelation, just a soft, quiet weight. Florence does not change you with thunder. It changes you with drizzle, with fig trees and cracks, and with poems no one signs.
The night has deepened, and with it, Florence has quieted into something softer than silence, a sort of lull, where even the shutters seem to blink slower. You walk now through streets you don't remember choosing, yet every turn feels inevitable. The city leads, and you follow. The rain has become something you wear more than feel. It beads along your shoulders, clings to the hem of your cloak, settles in the grooves of your boots. You don't bother shaking it off. You've passed the point of dryness. You're fluent now in dampness. You step into a square lit only by a single lantern swaying gently in the breeze. It casts a circle of gold across uneven stones, and at the center sits a stone platform with a chessboard carved into its surface. One bench, no players. You sit. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Public chessboards were once embedded in the stones of some Florentine piazzas, allowing citizens to play during idle hours or religious festivals. In poorer neighborhoods, pieces were made from carved wood, river pebbles, or scraps of broken pottery. Matches could last hours or be abandoned mid-game when soup, weather, or love interrupted. You examine the board. Someone's left a game half-played. The pieces, carved from cork and clay, glisten in the lantern light. You can't tell who's winning, but you suspect it's neither side. A pair of cats lounge nearby, one black, one calico, eyeing the game with feline disdain. You ask them who's next to move. They yawn in unison. Fair enough. You stand and wander onward, umbrella tapping gently against your leg. At the edge of the square, a small puppet theater stands shuttered for the night, its painted curtains streaked with rain. But someone has chalked a message across its side. Rain cancels nothing. It only edits. Here's your quirky tidbit. Traveling puppet troupes in Florence once held special rain performances, where puppets would wear miniature cloaks, carry tiny umbrellas, and reenact well-known tragedies soaked in improvised weather. The audience, huddled under awnings, often claimed the soggy versions were better than the originals. You press your fingers into the chalk message. The dust leaves a faint white trace. Florence loves a performance, even one it has to ruin a little. Down the next alley, a door opens briefly, releasing a spill of laughter and music into the night. You glimpse a group playing cards around a table scattered with orange peels and wine-stained cloth. Someone raises a glass toward you, then pulls the door closed again. You're not sure if it was an invitation or just good manners. Either way, it was enough. Scholars still argue whether Florence ever truly sleeps. Some claim it just changes masks, merchant by morning, muse by night, storm by accident. You turn a corner and find a staircase climbing upward in tight, spiraling turns. No sign, no railing, no promise. Just stone and height and possibility. So, of course, you climb. Each step is slick but steady. Each landing offers another glimpse of chimney smoke curling into night, of a lantern swaying like a ship in harbor, of your own shadow walking slightly ahead of you. You reach the top and find a small rooftop terrace, a hidden space with 2 stone benches, 1 broken column, and a perfect view. Florence stretches before you, a cathedral of rooftops. The dome glows faintly beneath scattered clouds. The river slinks like ribbon, and the rain, soft and insistent, continues without apology. You sit on the bench and let the city unfurl. You take out your lemon. Hold it up. It catches a drop of rain and shines like an offering. No one sees it. That's fine. Not every gesture is meant for an audience. You peel it slowly, letting the scent bloom into the air. It smells like childhood, or waking up early, or the first good sentence of a story. You eat 1 slice.
It is sharp, sweet, and a little ridiculous. Just like tonight, just like Florence in the rain. The slice of lemon lingers on your tongue, bright, bracing, oddly grounding. Up here, perched above the city's slow exhale, everything tastes different. You lean back against the cool stone bench and let your gaze soften. Florence below is no longer a place of churches, courtyards, and cloaks. It's become texture, motion, scent, a quilt of glowing windows and patient rooftops breathing beneath the drizzle. The air is still damp, but now it carries warmth, rising from chimneys, from baked bricks, from the thousands of sleeping lungs that fill Florence with dreams. You close your eyes for a moment. The rain taps lightly on your boots, your lashes, the lemon peel resting beside you like a curled question mark. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In the late 14th century, Florence invested heavily in the development of rooftop gardens, not for agriculture, but for contemplation. Aristocrats and artisans alike built elevated spaces to escape the crush of city streets. These terraces were considered therapeutic, a place for private meals, letters, sketching, or simply weather. Your terrace, though clearly long forgotten, must once have held such moments. Lovers pressing hands beneath moonlight, poets whispering verses into clay mugs, a tired parent teaching their child how to count the stars. You can feel the memory of those scenes in the stone beneath you. A breeze brushes past, tugging at the edges of your cloak. You open your eyes again to find the cats from earlier, somehow now curled together on the opposite bench. How they got up here is a mystery Florence will not explain. They blink at you with practiced nonchalance and go back to their important business of being warm. You offer them the other half of your lemon. They decline with theatrical disgust. Here's your quirky tidbit. Medieval Florentines believed cats had a special relationship with the weather. If a cat stared at the ceiling, it meant rain would worsen. If it hid under a bed, thunder was coming. And if a cat fell asleep in your lap during a storm, you were guaranteed good fortune or fleas. You stretch your legs and rise, giving the cats a respectful nod as you leave the rooftop. They do not return it, but that's just policy. You descend the spiral staircase carefully, the echo of your steps rhythmic and meditative. The stone is slick, but your footing is sure now. You no longer resist the rain's interruptions. You expect them. Back on the ground, Florence has grown darker still. The lanterns burn lower, casting wider shadows. The rain has nearly ceased, now more mist than movement. You walk slowly through a narrow arcade, its vaulted ceiling dripping at intervals like a leaky clock. A fresco above the arch shows an angel holding a scroll. The paint has faded so much that the words are illegible. You decide they probably said something like, "Don't rush." Scholars still argue whether Florence's greatest artistry was in what it built or what it allowed to erode. There's an elegance in both, the perfection of form and the poetry of decay. You step into another square, this one almost completely dark, except for a single window high above, glowing like a promise. A voice drifts from it, soft, melodic, unhurried. A lullaby, perhaps, or someone reciting lines to themselves, too quietly for the world, but too beautifully to be lost. You don't need to understand the words, you feel them anyway. You sit on the edge of a dry fountain and tilt your head toward the sky. The clouds have thinned, a few stars peek through, uncertain, blinking. You name one, Tuesday. Another, soup. You don't care for proper constellations, Florence doesn't either. You reach into your cloak and pull out the fig. You bite into it. It's sour and soft and exactly wrong in the right way. You laugh, quietly, then louder. A dog barks in agreement from 2 streets away. You stand, brush off your cloak, and begin walking again. No destination, no concern, just motion. Just soaking in the after-rain hush of a city that knows how to listen. Florence no longer guides you. Now you walk beside her. Together, you head into the edge of morning. Your footsteps echo a little more now. The city is still, but not lifeless. like a book left open on a bedside table, waiting patiently for its reader to return. The rain has nearly vanished, replaced by a cool hush that settles into every crack, every window pane, every cobbled seam between one century and the next. You turn into a side street you're certain you've never seen before, though it smells familiar, of cinnamon, damp linen, and a trace of ink. The buildings here lean in just slightly, like gossiping grandparents who've long forgotten their secrets but remember the rhythm. A lantern swings gently above a doorway. Beneath it, a bench with a weathered pillow and an empty teacup. You sit, not because you're tired, but because the bench looks like it expects company. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In medieval Florence, benches outside homes weren't mere furniture. They were conversation stages, matchmaking posts, even makeshift confessionals. Rainy nights turned them into listening places, where neighbors traded stories under dripping eaves, sometimes saying nothing at all and calling it everything. A moment later, a young man emerges from the doorway holding a lute. He nods to you, then begins to play, not for performance, but for the simple act of sound. His fingers stumble a bit, but the melody finds its footing. It's slow, wandering, familiar in the way dreams sometimes are. You listen. The music weaves with the city's breath, passing carts far away, the creak of a wooden shutter, the soft hiccup of a gutter still trying to drain. He sings a line, almost to himself. We count our steps by puddles. Here's your quirky tidbit. There was once a Florentine tradition of midnight measuring, where people would walk the city in the rain, counting how many puddles they stepped in, believing the number reflected the truth of their soul. Too few, and you were hiding something. Too many, and you were too careless with your heart. You glance at your boots. You've stopped counting. The song ends. The man nods again, steps inside, leaves the door slightly open. You rise, walking again, drifting through the quiet bones of the city. A bakery window glows ahead. You peer inside. Dough rises in neat rows, the heat from the oven fogging the glass. A woman inside wipes her brow with a flour-dusted arm, looks up, sees you, and taps the glass with a wink. She mouths, "Too early, but almost." Scholars still argue whether Florence was built to be lived in or merely admired. But standing here, you feel the answer is both, or neither, or something more poetic. Perhaps Florence exists just to remind you that every city, like every storm, is meant to be walked through. You pass another window where two silhouettes sit across from each other in perfect silence, sipping something warm. Neither speaks. It is the most intimate thing you've seen all night. A bell rings in the distance, not a church bell, but a small one. A signal that someone has lit the first fire of morning. You look up. The sky is still inked in blue-black, but it's thinning. A ribbon of lighter gray stretches along the horizon, like the hem of dawn's robe. A single bird chirps, then stops, as if embarrassed for starting too early. You find yourself back at the river. The Arno is a mirror now. Every bridge it holds is upside down, every lamplight a star. You lean on the railing, watching as a piece of paper drifts past, some forgotten note from the world above, now folded into the city's current. You wonder what it said. Then you imagine what you'd write if given one final page in this night. It wouldn't be a grand confession, not a secret or a truth, just something small. I walked, I listened, I got wet, and I loved it.
The edges of morning unfurl slowly, like Florence is stretching after a long rain-soaked nap. The city doesn't wake with trumpets or urgency. It stirs gently, like a cat blinking at first light, deciding whether it's worth getting up. You're still near the river. The stone railing beneath your palms is slick and cold, but it's begun to dry in places, where the breath of morning winds has kissed it clean. You watch a stray feather drift across the surface of the Arno, catching in a whirlpool before vanishing. The rain, at last, has stopped. You fold your umbrella, give it a little shake, and hook it on your belt like a medal of honor. It deserves it. So do you. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Florentine mornings, especially after rain, were considered sacred by many medieval artisans. The softened light, the gentle damp, and the muffled sounds made it the preferred time for sketching, composing, or reciting prayers. Sunrise after rain was considered an omen of clarity, personal or political. You stroll beside shuttered shops. The signs still hang crooked from last night's wind, and the awnings sag with moisture. A single baker opens his doors early, releasing a wave of warmth and the unmistakable smell of rising dough, honey, and something faintly citrus. You don't go inside. You don't need to. The scent alone is breakfast for the soul. You pass beneath an ivy-covered archway where drops fall from the leaves like time itself has sprung a gentle leak. There's no one else here, just you and Florence, and the after-rain hush that holds more magic than any cathedral choir. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Florentines used to whisper wishes into ivy after a storm, believing the wet leaves were closer to listening. A few would tie scraps of cloth to the vines, bits of dreams, scraps of apology, or grocery lists rebranded as prayers. You run a hand along the ivy. It responds with a shiver, or maybe that's you. Further along, a cat stretches beneath a wagon, blinks at you, and rolls over as if to say, "You're still here?" You are. The sun begins to flirt with the idea of rising. Not bold, not yet, just a suggestion of gold brushing the highest windows, like a candle being carried from room to room. Scholars still argue whether Florence looks better in sun or in rain, but those who've truly walked it at this hour know. It's not about the weather. It's about the aftermath, the softened colors, the way every surface remembers the storm. You wander past a statue that now glistens with morning dew. Someone has wrapped a scarf around its shoulders. You'd bet your last fig it wasn't there last night. Florence dresses its marble when it thinks no one is watching. You reach a small cloister tucked between two aging buildings. Inside, laundry lines stretch overhead, hung with white linens now damp with fog rather than rain. A woman steps out, yawns, and pins a sheet with the care of someone performing a ritual. She sees you, offers a small, sleepy wave. You return it with reverence. The city is no longer yours alone, and that's okay. A cart rolls past, pulled by a horse that looks almost half awake. The driver hums a tune about bread, love, and taxes. You catch a line. Rain makes the dough rise softer. It might be metaphor, it might be fact. You cross a tiny bridge, one you don't remember from maps or memory. It arches slightly, its stones uneven, its edges softened by time. You pause at the crest, look back once more at the city behind you. Florence glows now, not brightly, but warmly. A golden haze curls above the rooftops. The streets gleam. A woman pulls open her shutters and laughs at the morning. Somewhere a bell rings, not for mass, but because someone likes the sound. You smile. You step off the bridge and keep walking.
The first true rays of sunlight break through the thinning clouds, brushing everything in gold, like the painter of the day has finally arrived at their easel. You walk now through a Florence reborn, not dramatically, but gently, like an old friend waking up with the kind of stretch that ends in a sigh. The air is different, damp still, but fresher, lighter, a blend of baked bread, wet earth, and lavender from somewhere unseen. Your umbrella, no longer needed, hangs forgotten at your side. The lemon in your pocket feels like a relic from another life. One you walked through barefoot and blinking, always one puddle behind the story. You pass a small piazza where a trio of street sweepers moves slowly, almost reverently, guiding leaves and rain-washed grit into lazy spirals. One pauses to tip his hat at a pigeon. The pigeon doesn't seem to mind. Here's your mainstream historical fact. After storms, early morning street sweepers in Florence were often tasked with not just clearing debris, but interpreting it. Certain neighborhoods believed the pattern of fallen petals, leaves, and refuse revealed omens,
warnings, celebrations, or changes in luck. Some sweepers quietly kept journals of what they found. You imagine one now, scribbling, 4 olive leaves, 1 silk ribbon, a single silver button. Change is coming. You continue past, your feet now dry, but your pace still slow. Florence doesn't let go easily, not when she's just offered you her most intimate self. Wet stones, whispering walls, fig-sour skies. Ahead, a doorway opens, and a woman steps out holding a tin watering can. She glances up at the sky, then at you. "Bit late for this now," she says with a wry smile. Still, she waters the plants anyway. Florence is nothing if not poetic in its redundancy. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Florentines believed that watering plants after rain was an act of gratitude, not for the plants, but for the storm. A way to acknowledge that survival wasn't automatic, and even leaves liked applause. You pass her with a smile and find yourself in front of a familiar building, the one with the faded puppet theater, now drying beneath a patchy blue sky. Someone has chalked a new phrase beneath yesterday's. Rain writes what we forget to say. You nod, quietly, because it's true. Florence begins to fill again, not with tourists or noise, but with footsteps and yawns and the clink of morning cups. The city doesn't so much resume life as it resumes its dream, now slightly altered by the weather that passed through. You see a baker slide a fresh tray of bread onto a stone shelf. A child balances awkwardly on a doorstep, watching ants on the move. A painter dabs the corner of a canvas with a cloth and mutters, "Now it makes sense." You've looped back, somehow, to the very street where your night began. You recognize the cobblestones, the shutter that groaned in the wind, the spot where someone had left a teacup in the rain. It's still there. The rainwater is gone, but a tiny paper boat floats in the bottom of the cup. You don't touch it. You just watch it drift in place. Scholars still argue whether Florence is best experienced through its art, its food, or its storms. But those scholars probably haven't walked all night with a fig in their pocket and no particular place to be. The sky is soft blue now. A few clouds linger like guests who don't want to leave the party. The sun stretches itself across rooftops like it, too, just woke up in a foreign bed. You feel not changed, but translated. You've walked through a language of puddles and patience and found meaning in all the pauses. Florence says nothing, but the silence is warmer now.
You find yourself pausing, not because your legs are tired, but because the story feels like it's landing. Florence no longer urges you forward. It simply walks beside you now, humming low and slow, like an old song you thought you'd forgotten. The clouds have thinned into mere wisps, soft white threads drifting above the rooftops. The streets are awake, but not loud. You pass a violinist tuning quietly beneath an archway, a broom leaning against the stoop of a closed cafe, and an old man who nods at you like he's been waiting all night to do just that. You nod back, because yes, you both know something now. You follow the soft curve of a narrow alley to the riverside again, where the Arno glows faintly beneath the new sun. It looks like someone spilled liquid gold across the water. The city's reflection wobbles, more impressionist than precise, but you recognize it anyway. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In the early 1400s, when Florence began documenting its daily weather, rain was noted not in inches or hours, but in metaphors. City scribes recorded entries like, "The sky wept gently upon us," or "The clouds disagreed with the rooftops until dusk." It was a city that measured time in poetry. You look up. The sky doesn't weep anymore. It simply smiles, pale and wide. You sit on the low wall by the river and reach into your cloak. Out comes the lemon, still bright, still weighty with last night's stories. Next comes the fig stem, the folded poem, the button someone dropped beside a chessboard. And your umbrella, streaked with ink and patched by hands not yours. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Florentines believed umbrellas were more than tools. They were extensions of a person's inner weather. A borrowed umbrella could change your luck.
An inherited one could hold on to dreams, and a lost one, well, it might still be walking without you. You open it one last time. It smells like parchment and midnight, like fig trees and wet wool, like everything you didn't expect to learn when you stepped out into the rain. You stand and take a slow, full breath. The kind of breath people take when the air is no longer heavy with the future, but light with the present. You begin to walk one last stretch of river road. The stones beneath you dry in patches, like Florence is offering you stepping stones home. A breeze stirs. Somewhere a church bell chimes, not loudly, not urgently, just enough. Florence fades behind you, but it stays. In your boots, in your coat, in your lungs. And now, gently, we slow things down. And now, as morning unfurls its final ribbon of light across the rooftops, you breathe slower. The journey quiets. The sky is no longer full of questions. The city, no longer mysterious, simply rests beside you like a friend who has told you all her secrets, and now wants only silence. The streets still carry echoes of your steps, softened by time and morning mist. The rain has long since passed, but it's left behind something more lasting, a calm that seeps into your bones like warmth from a stone that held the sun too long. You find a place to sit, anywhere, a fountain's edge, a worn stoop, a cafe chair not yet claimed. You sit, you breathe, and the silence is kind. The lemon rests in your palm. The poem is folded again, the umbrella closed. Nothing dramatic, nothing final, just quiet. Florence doesn't need to say goodbye. You were never visiting. You were remembering. And now, as your eyelids grow heavier and your breath slows to the rhythm of early bells and drying leaves, you carry that memory with you. A city that speaks in puddles. A night stitched together by drizzle and fig trees. A rain that didn't chase you, but walked beside you all the way home. Sleep well, sleep warm, and let the rain fall where it may.